Streaminating. We are streaminating. Alright.
Confirmative.
Let's see. Oh, YouTube live, good. YouTube happy. Let's get the chat up there. Okay. YouTube chats.
Can you do like
there.
Can you do that picture
here too
as a mirror image instead of a regular feed?
What?
The camera that we see ourselves in.
This? Oh, that?
Yeah. Normally software would have it flipped like a mirror, so it's easier, so your brain doesn't. Because see how it's opposite right now?
Yes. I don't know.
It's not necessary, it's just easier on the eyes.
Transform. Flip. Oops. No, I didn't want to do that. Okay. That was the wrong box. Pretty sure that should be at the top. That chat window looks like this. Cool. This one we can flip. Transform.
What the fuck?
Not like that. Horizontal. Hold on to your lunch, folks.
Bam.
It kind of just screwed up the arrangement because now you're being obscured. I don't think it really matters. Does it really matter?
Should be that alright?
Kind of something like that.
It's not as warm on the seat anymore.
Yep.
Good.
Too bad. Too bad. Too bad. Okay, what else?
Let me just make
Scene.
Future proofing?
Yep. Oh, good.
Bonus can. Got a bonus can.
Yep. That is true. That is true. All right, still setting up here, and wow, we're already 3 minutes in. Look at that. We've completely bored everybody to death. They've all left. Nobody's here.
Awesome.
That don't matter. So we are almost there. Need one more thing to share to the chat peoples. Oh god, no, not that button. Copy. Here you go, chat peoples. Oh wait, it's already fucking grabbed it. So are we still calling it Guild Dynamics? What, since we're kind of going on a different topic, we're going to try and bring it back to the deck schema stuff, but we're going to go through commodification.
Yeah, so commodification plateaus and all of that stuff first. This is kind of the direction.
Commodification plateaus. We can always update this later, but
probably won't.
maybe plateaus. Commodification plateaus
And then
and products.
System model dynamics.
we can just call it products.
It's also the system model dynamics in terms of order and chaos.
Well, we can only really fit so much in a title. So commodification plateaus or system order.
Yeah,
system
I like
model
that
dynamics.
better.
System model dynamics.
Yeah,
Okay.
because it's really about that. Commodification is the outcome.
Dynamics, and then we can put a comma in products, because that's where we want to get to, right?
Sued.
Well, we got quite far into it.
Yeah.
Last time.
We're only stepping back to fill in more gaps.
Yep, more gaps have appeared, and we shall fill them in. Okay, so we got. Let's share this. Oops. have the wrong title, if anything. Or did I save it? I guess it's saved. Exit stream. Will not end a stream. Okay, so I edited that part. Why does YouTube have to be so complicated? Whatever. Okay, so we streaming. We is streaming. We got our chats up. We have added an extra camera, which is very exciting. You're not supposed to be able to read that, but it just doesn't matter.
It's evidence.
You almost can. This is our agenda, which is basically what we just said, what we'll be trying to go over. And we have a whole bunch of charts ready to go as well, so we can select from them as we please. Did you want to just jump right into the charts, or do you want to maybe try explain like where we want to go here, like try and give maybe one thing after another what we want to get into right now, like say over the next hour plus.
Start at the beginning basically, because that's where we left off.
Yep.
We should probably go over carriers, layers, mediums, capacities, power, all these wonderful little details, and then sort of back up a little bit and discuss the implications of the layering phenomena.
So about carriers, as we were just discussing earlier, this is a way of describing the ability to manipulate reality in a generic way, sort of, right? You've just got essentially media, but we have a technical term for what a medium is. But a medium composed of a bunch of carriers stacked together, like how you have to have a language of, say, English to speak, but it's being spoken out into, this is another carriers, like the compression waves of sound coming from mouth to ear.
Or edge marks on a piece of paper.
Right.
Or,
so we're still having English, but it's being embedded into different media. And basically this is the way of describing agency in different contexts, in that you have the ability to act on a medium or a carrier, right?
It gives rise to agency in that an agent is what separates different carriers from each other and ensures that there's signals. It basically is a transformative function of where signals on one carrier have a potential of affecting signals on another carrier, which are otherwise separated by membrane.
So this is what's sort of chaining together reality in this kind of model of intermeshing and layered carriers, right? And this is a way of describing the whole society or organizations, all these kind of things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, where you have a holonic sort of a stacking going on, where a piece of something is a whole onto itself.
Yeah, so that's a sort of fundamental part of the model that we're using, is that we're trying to find the most generic sort of ways of describing anything, and then using that to build something more complex.
Yeah, using that as an overlay out of which something else is more complicated is built. By overlay, I'm just referring to sort of categorizing what you have in this very specific way, in a systematized way, so that the pieces sort of fit together into a grander whole.
Yeah, and when you say overlay, this is kind of like reminds me of like the virtual reality overlay. So we're trying to describe reality in a way that gives us the power to manipulate it more correctly.
Yeah, it's basically just taking out arbitrary. Arbitrary just means in the context when you don't get handed over a context, The selection is arbitrary, but
Right. And that's another part of it, is that we're using this model to describe things from the deepest experience of reality. So like your memory and stuff like that, and your cosmos, the field of things of reality. Like, these are also carriers within you that come together to form this neural operating system, which does stuff. So this is like the fundamental context.
When discussing something like the word reality, we're not referring to, anything tangible necessarily. We're talking about perception.
Mm-hmm.
We're not discussing, scientific experimentation or.
It's not a comment on what is or what exists.
Yeah, it's a comment. It's a comment on perception alone. In that, the reality is sort of like a running thing in and of itself. That's sort of that it is interfacing with something that isn't itself. So from that perspective, it's how. So reality, from the perspective of that thing, is like what kinds of things it encounters, whether they be self-generated or extrinsically supplied.
Right. That's so like the purpose of the neural operating system is to present a reality to the user. Sort of.
A virtual one.
That's the context we mean it in.
Yeah, so let's not get too confused over that word. We're not here. We're not talking about the chemical and physics and all of that stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna set up the monitor so I can see what the stream is looking like. So I'd be interested to go back over quickly what we described as sentient machine, and that's the embedding of these upper layers.
It's the embedding of the lower layers into the upper layers.
Right.
But forming the two steps in this. It's using the lower layers to form the upper layers, and then embedding the lower layers into said upper layers, such that they are reflected.
And this is the typical classic strange loop.
Yeah, and embedding the initial layer below constitutes some of the embedding of all the layers below by extension. And so the act itself does not actually have to go beyond that first bootstrapping, I guess, to have the effect of the whole, which is actually not capturable by any specific model. It's impossible to do, simply because you'll run into linguistic limitations.
Yeah. And
so that's as far as we've established that process. And
did we have a chart for that? Not really.
No, we had a drawing on the table. I had that circle stuff thing.
We did kind of have.
I don't know if you ever took a picture of it.
So we were talking about the tops of the natural guild stack, and then this embedding of fundamental into natural into proximal, right?
Yep. There's that embedding, and then there's also the embedding of computing into the synthetic neural net computing, which has the same effect of creating that sentient machine and realizing the entire stack.
Sweet.
Speaking of stacks, we should discuss the layering mechanisms. Carriers, expressions being carriers, and then the entire stack being capacity, power, and its implications there.
Yeah, like how to build stacks out of carriers.
Yeah.
And what is a carrier and all this.
Yeah, so to step back a little bit, we're talking about mediums, we're talking about carriers, like I was saying, which is the two subjects are connected. A carrier is basically something that can be, what do you call it? given variance in one of two dimensions.
Right.
So let's say with a piece of paper and a pen, it's like etching a mark onto it at some spatial location. With a sound wave, it's expressing that sound. It's creating that compression in the air and having it expand into through space and time, through space over time. And then you have another dimension to this where you combine these etchings over another dimension like time. So on a piece of paper, you make another mark beside it, make another mark beside it, you use another dimension
Right.
to extend these markings, and all of a sudden you get a letter. And out of a letter you get a word, and out of a word you get a paragraph, and so on and so forth. So as the other dimension moves on, these markings obtain more and more and more meaning by being decorated by other markings
hold
from
on.
the same system.
We've already embedded multiple carriers there just by saying so, like the ability to scratch a mark into paper with a pencil in, say, a line or in a curve. Those are like little fragments of symbolic fragments or whatever. You put them together and you get a letter. So the carrier, the paper as a carrier, has this capacity to hold a line or a curve, or many of them, right? That's one carrier. Embedded into that, we're saying, okay, when you do a line like this and like that, it's a letter. And this, now we have 24 letters in an alphabet. That's another carrier. Now we have the English language, and we're having words. So you take a number of these, A, B, C, D, whatever, into making words, and the words themselves, this is another carrier because we understand words.
You add grammar to that, and it becomes another carrier of sentences.
Right.
Another carrier would be then the paragraph, which completes a thought. Which completes a whole idea out of disconnected thoughts. Another carrier would be then to summarize, to have an exposition or a narration in which these paragraphs are stitched together, acting as a full carrier onto itself that you can embed into other places as a full-blown concept. And so on and so forth it goes. So this is what we're referring to as a layering of a stack,
Right.
and then having different layers within a specific.
And
So once you have this stack, what you can say is that the carrier that's not reliant on any other carrier within that stack, i.e. the one that relies on the ability to just do the markings on the piece of paper, to just put the sound out into a wave.
right.
That's
the medium.
Yeah, the very, very basic carrier of the entire stack will be the medium. And the medium is the thing, given a stack, is the thing that has a capacity. So with this stack, its capacity of layering is that. With another stack, it could be a different capacity in that you couldn't form as many layers, or you could form many more layers on top of it. It just depends on the nature of this layering mechanism itself. So with that said, that's basically where we draw the distinction between the capacities. And each capacity effectively has another property which we call power. Power being the ability of a particular stack to take on various configurations, and a more powerful stack will be able to expand in a much more powerful way in its medium than a less powerful stack. And so this is what we would be calling power, capacity, and medium.
Right.
That's how they're related.
Right.
So.
And interesting, when you introduce certain carriers, that can vastly increase the power on the medium.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just by having a more properly ordered fundamental side of things, you get a much more potential explosion of possibility.
Which, with the other side to that, is that it also brings entropic properties. The more potential you have, the more potential for entropy,
right?
To take over and not necessarily continue the expansion. So there's a fine balance between these two aspects. Power and capacity are very much constrained by entropy and uncertainty, and these little
Right.
mechanics that are inherent in the fundamental medium, which we will refer to as space-time, out of which everything is fundamentally
I guess-
constructed.
I guess that's what I meant by my comment too, that when you have some well-constructed fundamental carriers,
Mhm.
they are accounting for the things which would entropically destroy the system.
Right.
Hopefully. And that's what gives them that more higher power.
Well, each time you have a layer, it has to go back to that over that, or
Right.
else it's not going to continue to be a layer fundamental for something on top of it.
Right.
So each jump has to have this process of recognizing all the
Right.
jumps below it, and we're basically at a stage of where cognition has to do it for where cognition came from, to account for itself, and that's what we would call the
Right.
struggle of the age, if you will.
Yeah, trying to make that really clear, crystal clear carrier at the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
as clear as possible.
So
And just an interesting note there I wanted to point out. When you are having thoughts in your head and you want to go to write them down, you don't think about the sticks that come together and the curves to make each a letter, right? So these carriers are kind of like unconscious in a way. At the top, when you're at the top, using a carrier to command agency across carriers or whatever, that's kind of happening unconsciously.
You only really need the layer below, which we see repeat itself with computing and sentient with computing and the synthetic neural networks. That you're only really embedding the layer below into itself, and that embedding embeds the layers below that by virtue of the initial function. So this is a recurring theme where the only real means to communicate out of a layer is really just the immediate fundamental layer below it, and it's then its responsibility is to pass the message along down to the stack and back up the stack wherever the artifact is supposed to actually come together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah,
So,
that was pretty big.
Yeah, so we obviously have the two main stacks that we're concerned with. One being the actual OS itself. So that stack comes from physicality.
You're talking about the neural OS stack. Let's pull that up.
So it's very clearly it arrives to us from the physical sort of universe, if we want to call it that. Physical being a concept in and of itself, of course, but the point still stands in that we're talking about particles becoming cells, becoming nerves doing their thing with sending electrical signals, and then from then on the system takes over with symbolic representation, artifacts being like the messages communicated within that system using those symbols, mimetics being of course the full-blown kind of like programs, but really like packets of meaning, if you will. So they don't really have anything. They're not really anything without a context. But if you plug a meme into a scene, it totally it gives that scene a particular flavor, a meaning.
This is to me a main conjunction point between the concrete of the world and the abstract of the mind and its ideals.
Yeah, so this is kind of where that is actually comes together in the mimetic layer, where the content and the structure of how the content is used affect each other, with the abstractions being sort of like the labels that arise in the mind to keep track of everything, and the spectacle being the things that are being tracked, so the things that are being labeled on the other end of it. And so
Right.
this gives you like the things being the concrete, the labels being the abstract, the memetics is the mechanism that runs the whole
Between them, sort of.
the stitching of how that all works together.
Mhm.
And underneath all that, of course, the actual mechanics of the signals coming together to create something for it to use as a concept.
Right, and to me that's where the final layer comes in, kind of the at the top. The shared, I guess we don't have really shared.
The
here.
shared comes up after spectacular, in which all of these objects actually
Okay,
take on
yeah,
narratives,
shared,
a
right.
narrative attribute, in that you no longer are dealing with objects coming into and out of existence arbitrarily, but rather
Right.
they have an identity. They flow through time. They things happen to them. They carry on this what's called state, if you will. Those are the things that we tend to recognize as objects, but really they are narratives in the sense that they have a ongoing process attached to their existence. It's not just a one-off thing that is set to exist,
Right.
like the number 2 out there in the universe or something like that.
So when we're coming up from the neural OS, from the bottom, from fundamental up to significant, we're going through memetic to abstract to concrete. This is the concreteness. And then that leap past the horizon into the shared, this to me is where it kind of bounces down again. Like
There's a reflective.
you're coming back down in, out through the body, out through the media, out into the world again, because then you're seeing objects as a thing moving through time that you're encountering, right?
Yeah, and so that's where you get the shared space, and from there you move into a diplomatic space where like these objects now need to negotiate their own existence with everything that else they find themselves involved with. So communication is one of the main differences between a purely objective sort of spectacular world where objects simply are reactive things. Here you have the narratives that are attached to them, and so we're negotiating different narratives with each other. And the stitching together of different narratives is what gives us the universal tapestry of what's going on.
There's a lot of uncertainty to that too.
Yeah, this is where we get into a thing called the polyverse, because it's not a clear mesh of a universe. It's basically a kind of like different contexts have different universes attached to them, because there's different ways to look at objects, and there's different narratives attached to everything. An object could have several different kinds of narratives and from several different sources. The same person could have several narratives for an object. There's really no one-to-one with any of this, and so the net effect that this has is that yes, we get universes, but we get so many of them, it's like a tapestry of them, which is why we call it a polyverse, which is actually the correct one of the correct ways of saying that damn word.
This kind of reminds me of the different contexts that a single object can have, like what we've been talking about recently.
Yeah, and so one context, the object finds itself in one universe, subject to these narratives between these people.
Right.
In another context, it's like a completely, for instance,
the same pile of material has the different.
For instance, let's take this shop. It's a very different pile of material to you, to anybody who works here, than it is to, say, the taxman over there. That's got to calculate what you owe to the government.
Yeah, exactly. And this becomes a big problem or an interesting thing to deal with when you're trying to represent this with a virtual reality overlay, such as the products, like the card box.
By interesting, what I think you mean is that as soon as you try to do that, you'll find that these universes don't actually match, and when they don't match, you get conflict out of thin air, basically. And so this is where the whole idea of dealing with a cosmic layer and with a polyverse process is to sort of tackle that issue of saying, okay, we've got a multiplicity of realities on our hands, and without that recognition, really, you couldn't really do anything. You couldn't really do anything with the knowledge of the entire stack without that portion.
And then you have this problem of projection onto objects, saying that is this, and you try to have a crust over reality, which is not possible.
Right. That gives us what that does is it leaves you at the significance number 11 and doesn't let you go into the 12th layer. That
Right.
gets you stuck in the diplomatic, because then you're stuck trying to prove your view, right? Your view becomes this encrusted version of what reality is supposed to be, and you're trying to sell that. And
Right.
now it's like its own packet of a universe that's not necessarily integrated into anything
Yeah.
but outside of itself.
And this reminds me of embedding again, because within your own universe, you have to embed this idea that you're not the only universe.
Yeah, and this
And that
again,
becomes a self-reflection and all.
Again, this is like embedding the idea of a universe into a grander multi-universal scheme.
Yep.
And it's simply a matter of really accounting for that fact, which gives the opportunity to utilize a different perspective, a different universal perspective, to the extent of adopting it for the context that it's required in, and then letting it go as soon as that context is gone, and in essence, not to hold any one particular view at any one point, but to hold
Right.
a potentiality of views.
To wear them like hats.
Yeah.
As you say.
Yeah,
Or
and
with identities too.
and not in the sense that, and not in a deceptive sense either. We're not talking about trying to,
Yeah.
weasel your way through conceptually around this and that
No,
system.
it's actually giving maximum respect to all the different views.
Yeah, in the ideal sense, it would be. It's to acknowledge that they are as real as any other, and so your view is as real as my view and as their view, despite all of them being bullshit. Ultimately, of course, in some sense, they're still valid views. They affect our reality. They affect what we say to each
Right.
other.
Yeah, and there's quality. There is quality to views, and the effect of views, and
Yeah, so
and they do have effects that can be detected and fed back into the view itself and modified to become a better view.
Yeah, so it's not a disconnected system. It's when you try to pretend that it is disconnected that the issues begin to arise.
Right.
And
That projection stuff.
yeah, that's exactly what I'm referring to.
Hmm. A very common problem for the spectacle.
So yeah, that's these layers. Another,
Cool.
and once I be right back, what the other stack I want to tackle is the primordial archetypes, which deal specifically with the APS.
Cool. Let's hit a quick break here. Yeah. Feel like we're on a bit of a mission right now.
Always.
We got that extra hour. I noticed usually we would be streaming by right about now, and we're already half hour in. Or we just would arrive now and start streaming soon.
Alright, so where were we? We left off with...
We were at the
next
neural
stack.
OS and all that. So we want to pull up another chart, or...
Yeah, the next stack, the archetype stack.
Wait, this one?
Uh-huh.
We don't want to go into that's for later.
Yeah.
Okay. Roger that.
So this is just to bring up the fact that we have another layering phenomenon going on.
Right.
This particular one is actually restrained to one of the layers of the previous diagram. So this would be the abstract layer, and it's itself, as you can see, layered a little bit differently. In this case, we're looking at the interpreted universe, so to speak, as a whole, and how it's subdivided into different aspects for sense making, I guess, and what plays into creating an ordered understanding out of a chaotic sort of array of signals, symbols, and whatever else comes across the neurological system. So we have a few divisions, but the most important one, out of which everything we really work through, would be the primordial stack in the middle, where we begin with uncertainty at the bottom and end with a state at the top.
It is really interesting how we have two stacks that we've identified here. The first one is kind of just happens to be what builds up in all these layers, carriers, if you will, to the point of experience of spectacle. So that the whole neural operating system thing, whatever's going on in your head to make experience happen, that's through all these layers of
from physical to non-physical, so to speak. Yeah.
Right, which we just went through, and then within that, we're isolating the abstract as the thing that builds a world out of something, that that shows you all the pieces. What is your cosmos of the different pieces? And then this stack here is the organization of matter between chaos and order in a more general sense.
Yeah, so in the sense that with this stack you can capture the other stack in the sense that it is a it's all it does is another medium for representation.
Right, so we can use this to take care of the previous one.
And so from this perspective, we're looking at a few properties of how it's built up, like how does how it would be built up. And the first thing we notice is that it's in a state of uncertainty, just like the rest of the physical world.
Sorry, and this must emerge from the first stack as well. If you don't have this, then the first stack is not able to take care of itself. There's a codependent.
So the other stack needs to understand this stack, and this stack represents the other stack. So it's not a clear-cut one-to-one again. If you're trying to do one-to-one, you're going to have a really bad time.
Yeah, I don't mean one-to-one, but they're definitely seriously correlated.
Yeah, so I would look at this as a more of an abstract depiction of the universal carrier, which I would call space-time. The other stack is more like is more like a particular stack within space-time, right? That emerges.
Right. Yes.
Which has all of these properties.
And so you never actually, you don't have to think about biological, your serves, your cells, your nerves, your the signals going on in your head. You don't need to think about those necessarily. What you do need to think about is this type of stuff, between order and chaos.
Sort of a more abstract view of what those things actually do. And this is where I'm kind of saying that it's more about like the properties of what you find about that medium. So one of the first fundamental properties that it carries through from the physical world as science will define it, is the uncertainty principle.
Right, and that's at the bottom here.
Yeah. Yeah, and the uncertainty principle in this context simply means that we're still dealing with potential rather than an actualization of that potential at every stage. At every point in time when the decision is being made, it's a matter of probability rather than a specific predetermined outcome. Like you have the same sort of, I hesitate to say wave function collapse. There's no physical wave going on. There's more of a inertia. The inertia itself comes from the layer of narrative. The narrative carries with itself a meaning, therefore that meaning is going to be dictated by what that narrative is pushing towards, and so that's the sort of the where the momentum and the velocity and all these analogies come from the perspective of a narrative pushing objects around. So we have that force sort of involved in the system. So when it comes to uncertainty, we're still dealing with those narratives being combined in such a bizarre way.
Well, also past the horizon, like what we can have a model in our head, in our neural operating system of how things are, but that ultimately never is what actually is, right?
Yeah.
So we're always just putting things out into the ether, as you like to say.
Yeah.
And receiving signals back.
So from that perspective, yes, you also have that going on. There's also always a kind of dysmorphism between the sense data and your archetype.
Yeah, that's fundamental.
And all of that stuff. So that comes right from the operating system's functionality itself. Entropy being a function.
So we're going over
the
primordial stack here. I was just thinking, I wish that my mouse cursor would show up, but it doesn't. So it's the stack with the green boxes here. This whole stack, we're going from bottom to top here, the primordial.
Okay, yeah. I didn't realize that was the case. Yeah, so we're going from uncertainty to entropy. Entropy is just another way of saying uncertainty. It's really just like why things are uncertain. And entropy really simply speaks to the fact that there are more chaotic combination of things than there are of non-chaotic combinations of things. The simplest example I know is from physics, is to take a room full of two gases separated by a wall. So on the one side you have just one kind of gas, on the other you have another kind of gas. You take that wall out, and over time they mix, and the mixture happens simply because there is random movements within each gas. And the question is then becomes, so what are the chances of these gases now, without that wall in place, to separate into half and half like they were before? And it's a lot more difficult, right? Because there are more ways for them to be mixed than there are for them to be in that separated states. It's a simple, it's a simple numbers game.
And even though when they were separated, there's still like an infinite number of ways
between
they can
themselves.
Be separated,
yes, but even between themselves, that is significantly smaller than the combined.
If we compare infinites, if you don't have a wall there, it's
it quickly becomes a really really difficult to justify why these gases should be separated. And so this is the same problem we're facing with uncertainty and entropy in the mental scene, the cognitive one.
So we're gonna walk up this stack. We can see chaos at the bottom. On the left side there as well, we have chaos and order. So we're walking up towards order. And I'm just kind of wondering, so we're going to get into this system model dynamic as well as the order and chaos and this flipping phenomenon that we always find, which makes it difficult to pin down what is chaos, what is order.
Yeah, that's coming. I think I just want to cover why this is chaos, why that's order. Sort of tackle that.
Yeah, so we're in chaos right now, describing. We're walking up, though.
Yeah, so we've defined what we mean by uncertainty, what we mean by entropy, and really the whole thing, again, another view of it is space-time. This is what space-time looks like, right? It looks like these entropic, uncertain mesh of things happening. So this is just a clarification that uncertainty and entropy really are the makeup of space-time itself. And space-time is really defined through matter, in the sense that its significance its significance is only apparent when you have matter in it. Right? Space-time in and of itself as a concept is utterly useless. But it is a background for matter, for the interplay of what matter is. So the what isness of it. So that's again, matter then becomes just another way to say space-time. So just like entropy was another way to say uncertainty, just like space-time was another way to say entropy, matter now becomes another way of saying space-time. Life also becomes another way of saying matter, because life is like
a box of chocolate.
No, life is the next layer here, simply because if you just leave it at matter, you're basically talking about like you can be talking about the rocks and whatnot, but again, these things have no significance to themselves, right? Like, there's no rock that goes, hey, it's cool being a rock, or anything like that. This is sort of like there's no recognition.
Right.
There's no recognition
but you
of
can
any of that.
still look at the fact of a matter coming together to clump into a rock, and in a way it becomes a thing, right? And later it will become not a rock anymore, just dust.
Yes, so there's that aspect of it, and the hyper sort of complicated process of it becoming biological creatures is like the cusp end of what you're talking about here. So yeah, so matter really culminates into what life is. It's just its like we consider it to be its basic natural trajectory of what matter is in its essence. So space-time moves through as matter towards life, towards organization into life. Like that's the that's the trajectory of making layers more and more complicated within the medium, right? Because we're still within the space-time medium, so we're just making it more and more complicated internally. And
now, is it interesting at this point to point out the relationship between entropy and life and negentropy, or the injection of order and energy into systems which make life in some way?
Well,
how do we fit that in?
Life is an accelerated form of entropy. It has
in a manner of speaking, right?
It has a localized negative. It's kind of like a neat trick in that it's a localized negative entropy, but fundamentally an increase in entropy externally.
Its things are decaying or faster.
Even faster. So like a hot-blooded animal needs far more food to metabolize itself. For itself to then say cold-blooded animal, and that's the complication that we're looking at.
That's how it's not a contradiction that life is happening this way. It actually is an acceleration of entropy.
Yeah, it's a reflection of it, and in fact, it has that quality here, where we're sitting in the middle.
Yep. And
death is a way that life actually is expressed. If you think about it, fundamentally eating, but dying too. Dying is the most fundamental act, the final act, if you will, of a living creature. There's no life that does not end in a death, for one. So all life can be expected to.
Trigger warning.
Sorry about that. we're not talking about nihilism here. We're simply discussing the fact that things end. So as you were saying with the rock, it comes together only to fall apart. So same, life only comes together to fall apart. It's literally like the only way you know that there was life somewhere is because you found its fossils. Right, so that's just the reality of it, and that concludes the chaotic aspect of what is found in our quote-unquote cosmos. The rest of it is sort of putting it into a context, giving it an order so you can understand what state things are in.
Mm-hmm. So this is an interesting jump.
Yeah.
Of course.
So in this so now we're starting to use much more familiar words for one. Well, not more familiar, but more complicated concepts to capture this orderly.
Right, and isn't this also the stacking of carriers when you have that order sort of overlay?
Yeah.
The rise and fall of all structure can happen, but on top of it you can also have an order which persists through time.
Right. This is exactly what this is supposed to convey.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, we start off with the animal as the basic unit of the life and death cycle we just discussed. So the animal is is what is represented by both life and death here, and animal is just like, don't worry about plant versus animal kind of stuff. We're talking from cell and on up. So we're including our plant cousins in this discussion,
Mm-hmm.
just in a different, just in a very different sort of mental structure. And I don't know if we need to explain a lot about why an animal is life and death here.
Oops.
Like why that would constitute the point. But essentially, the animals are the things that are alive and the things that die.
Right. Well, not to mention that animal procreate. So you're having a persistent animal over time, including a plant or whatever.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the animal would be like your most basic
Starting with
unit
the
of order.
single-celled organism, we would consider that under that.
Yeah, the word animal is simply easier to keep track of mentally. If you start thinking about plants and cells and all of that stuff, you're gonna start losing the picture of what it's supposed to convey, which
Mm-hmm.
is life, death.
And the root of animal, anima, I think points towards the right thing. That which has a life to it, a life force to it.
A self-life, yeah.
Animated.
Yeah, it's sort of an internal self locus,
Mhm.
where it's no longer just a function of the environment, but there's also an inner environment involved.
Right, which is sustaining itself through time, surfing on top of this chaos.
Right. So we then go into human, not the human species, but the human sort of mental structure. So this is more of a technicality, and this technicality stems from, how do I explain this? The difference between the sort of like the standard quote unquote animal versus the human animal in this case would be how much of its developmental neural network activity is delayed, not into is fundamentally put not into its
Nurture versus nature.
yeah, not into its most natural instinctive makeup, but rather is delayed and is nurtured through a ritualistic mechanism in which you learn the activity through repetition of somebody else and mimicry.
Right.
And with this, where this mimicry could take on a variety of different forms. So you're not bound to a single. Your ritual is the thing that binds you to the way you do the activity, not your genetic makeup, not nothing instinctive that makes.
So
you do
this to me is where the animal becomes Turing complete, if you would say it that way, if that's the right concept.
Sure, it starts to process itself as an external object of the environment, and instead of simply being a reactive
Part of it,
part of that environment. In the most natural sense. So what we see is a delay in how things are learned.
Yeah, right. So all life is having this sort of like neural net type reaction to the environment and how to survive. It has reactions and all that kind
Otherwise
of stuff.
it wouldn't be there, as it would be dead.
Right, but the human archetype is able to take any of these objects or types of objects, the universe that it feels it's part of, it can take that and dissect any part of it and give it a completely new meaning. Right? This is a totally different
Yeah, so the
field.
neural network is not reacting, it's internalizing something, and then it tries to overlay that with different scenarios or different ways of doing it. And because of that internalization, because of that because of the delay in the reaction, what the reaction can be its potential becomes much greater.
Mm-hmm. In fact, this is what allows us through the whole, and we're going to get into that, the plateaus of commodification. This is what allows us to essentially be plucked from our environment and dipped into a vat of pure artificial virtual reality, where nothing
came from, nothing arrived there through any of these stacks.
I wanted to quote whose line is it anyways, where nothing the points don't matter or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember what he said.
Yeah, it's the game where the points don't matter.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big step, and that's why it's one of the primordial layers. And then what do we get after that?
And mechanics, the rituals themselves, which, as you can see, can be very dead. Just from the word machine, you can kind of get that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily so. The body is a machine. So if we were to really look at it from a proper point of view, it's not the machine as evil or anything. It's just that a ritual in and of itself, without the underlying human, without the underlying animal, a ritual is a mechanical activity. It's it has to have the connection back to its origin for it not to be.
Right. So mechanical isn't a bad thing. This is taking this whole new layer of potentiality from our human ability to completely manipulate our own neural net, and it's taking pieces of that and making functional regions of functionality where you take your body through time and do this task, or you do this task in this context and this task. These are machines.
Yeah, so this is where we get into fiat, and fiat is basically what happens when you're under a machine, under the mechanics of a machine. Fiat is the dictation of that machine over activity. And in this case, fiat is simply used because it's in its authoritative sense. You, when you're participating in a ritual, you're taking that ritual as the authority over the activity, and so you're allowing a fiat system to dictate the activity that is happening. Now, fiat comes again in both flavors. You can have fiat that is completely detached from reality, from any recognition of where
Self
itself is coming from.
Yeah.
In which case, what fiat does is basically just maintains something else, some kind of other arbitrary system that doesn't necessarily contribute anything to the rest of the human stack or the animal, or has anything to do with death or life or matter or completely imaginary scenarios.
Right.
So fiat can go both ways. You can have fiat that takes care of it and creates a ritual around the fact that a human is a ritualistic being, around the fact that the human is an animal, and so on and so forth.
And this
in which
must involve the embedding of carriers again.
Right.
We come back to that
because that's the recognition, right? Because that's how you know that's how you would recognize these things, and when you take them into account, what you do with that authority, with that fiat, is actually completely within the boundaries of the thing that make up the fiat work in the first place, and it becomes a very holistic system, not one at odds with itself. And of course, then we get into how to express this fiat and what does that expression look like, and that's where we get corp and state. Corp being the expression of that fiat in terms of activity, like an actual organization around that activity as to like this place is doing that thing, has the authority to do this thing, is doing that thing, and then underneath, on top, sorry, of all that sits the state of things, sort of connecting the different pieces of the corporations into a greater context, so that no one corporation is messing up the stack while the other ones are trying to exist. So it's the thing that feeds the stack right back into the corp, so that the fiat is appropriate, and that the machinery itself is consistent with the human and the animal, and the cycles of death, life, matter, space-time, entropy, and uncertainty.
Yep.
And that is effectively how we have tackled the concept of chaos and order.
Interesting, at the top here we have these green boxes, which state and corp are broken out into their own, and then personal, which one is that? We have human, machine here.
Personal would be the human.
Human. So machine shouldn't be green, perhaps. Never really thought about it.
The machine would be the institute, and it's sort of the combination of state and corp, right? That whole triad thing. Remember when we were talking about the breakup of the archetypes, that flower picture?
Yeah.
That's the institute sort of straddles that, and that would be the machine. So it's when all three are together.
Seems like we may need to update a bit or incorporate, because we don't really have a chart for institute, right?
We have a spreadsheet.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. So corp and state here are reflected in their own stacks again.
Yeah, and so is the human.
So we have this whole order to chaos thing reflected yet again into different contexts.
Yep. There's also a fun, like the elemental column here, which just talks about the activity of chaos and order, like how that comes about. How does chaos become order, and then how does order become chaos again? And so we're looking at basically what we call consolidation, things coming together, and decay, things coming apart.
Yep.
All of this takes place in space over time. Space being a very static thing where you can isolate things
kind
from
of
each
like
other.
the ideal, like
order.
Plato's forms type of idea.
And whereas time is the where everything is moving and everything is the most chaotic it can be. So that's what you're
so
seeing.
space is emergent from time,
so to speak. It's all codependent. There's nothing apart from anything else. But yeah. So with those two stacks, we can kind of see different aspects to layering phenomena and layering carriers, and getting a stack within a carrier. So yeah.
We almost brought this one point up about carriers here being, so each layer potentially being a carrier, but then I remember you mentioned the corporate, and the corporate is a carrier, the state is a carrier. I was thinking like along the lines of like, let's take the corporate stack. When you have real estate here, that to me it seems like a carrier. You need to have space, even like tables and furniture in a place to make something useful.
Absolutely.
That's kind of real estate to me. And you would have an agent which is thinking along those lines.
Yep.
To make something available to
real
that,
estate
to the
agents
stack.
are a real thing. So
Well, there you go. So in terms of like how to do the virtual reality overlay here, I would think to give each one of these, like real estate, accounting, process, project management, its own carrier and its own agent to interact with the other carriers.
Well, every time you hit a layer, you're hitting a new language, and every time you take a layer,
Exactly.
every
Yeah.
time you take one of the layers and split it back up into reflection, the first original layer stack, like we did with the personal, corporate, and state, right? Every time we did that, each one of those slots becomes their own languages too.
Right. Yeah.
Always.
So in each box here, we have a different language, a different carrier.
And there will be, and like these would be like, each row would then be like variations of a similar dialect, so to speak.
Right, and so you could say that the three stacks to the right here are tapping into an agency and a greater carrier, which is described primordially.
Yeah, so like they're always going to be using that. So it's like a crisscross of carriers, if you will. On the one hand side, it's going to be like from doubt to preservation to occupancy, moving upwards. On the other hand, it's going to be from uncertainty to doubt to risk to regulation, moving that way. And they're both working at the same time. It's like a duality. It's not an either or.
Mm-hmm.
It's a complementary thing.
Yep. So this will
Which obviously complicates everything.
This will come in handy, though.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like less and less ways to have it all clearly defined, like people would want it to, because it's always going to come back into different ways of looking at it.
So we haven't really hit into the system model dichotomy here, or the chaos order flipping.
Chaos order, we got finally to chaos order, which we now can use to talk about that.
Right, but not the flipping part. We want to bring that up.
The flipping part is going to be, So, having covered chaos and order, we can now look at things a bit more abstractly again. Step back from the details, if you will, and just look at those two concepts. The point being is that we have two views of what chaos and order can be, and it really depends on whether you're looking at it from the chaotic point of view or the ordered point of view. So let's look at the actually the bottom should be first, should be the top here.
Noted.
I would have those squares
And
reversed.
why would you? So
Because you want to start.
you want to look here first at
Yeah.
this being order,
Order.
which is a natural thing.
Yeah, I want to look at the bottom left
Yep.
corner
That makes sense.
as the starting point of this picture.
Carry on.
And that's because when you look at it, what you're seeing is the order here is from the perspective of the branch, right? To the branch,
Right.
this is what an order is.
And this is kind of a model thing too.
Yeah.
From
and
model, we mean kind of like the internal and the tree of life, all that kind of stuff. Like
the layers coming together from the bottom
Yeah.
of the layers, like it's a natural growth.
and never mind what the mind thinks about it.
Yeah. And what to the mind though, if it's trying to assert what all of this is, or sorry, if we forget about the mind for a second.
My term.
So we established order as being like the order that to the branch. That what it means. So if we look over to the right hand side, we
Bottom
see,
right.
yeah, at the bottom right, we see chaos for the branch would be to take it apart like that, separate it needle by needle,
Right.
branch bit by bit. It would die, right? It would be like it cannot
Yeah.
survive that.
This is what happens after the tree is dead. And
Yeah.
you just happen to have the needles lined up, but they would be scattered all over the place. And you can see they're ordered generally from small to large, which is a
Yeah.
weird thing to do.
So it's chaos to that branch. It's death to it. It's like it cannot survive this process. But on the top, if we look at the other side, the top picture, which should be the bottom, to the mind, we see a chaotic organization of the branch. Like everything is all over the place. You can't really see what's what.
Yeah.
right? It's all meshed together, and so to our mind, we want to separate all of these bits so that we can tell, oh, this is that, this is the other thing, this is the other thing, and so the order, what's chaotic and what's ordered, flipped, and the flipping happened because a different layer is looking at what's going on. To the branch layer, the layer it comes from, this is the most natural order thing because it's not attaching any labels to these branches. It's not. It's just pure function. It's purely this. It's a pure organized system, undifferentiated from itself.
Yeah.
On the other hand, to be able to understand how the system is working, the mind needs to separate it into these different pieces, and so the mind sees the original configuration as chaotic, in that it cannot pull anything apart from and say, oh, this is this is that, this is the other thing. To do that, it does pull it apart and says all of these things, and that's how it maintains this order. And so when we're talking about flipping, this is what happens when you're starting to use the higher layer to assert a lower layer. Order and chaos, what's ordered and what's chaotic switches. And this could be a real big problem if you if you start to believe that.
Right, and this is the fiat projection.
This is the kind of fiat
problem
you would not want. You want the
Right.
fiat that tells you about both of these images.
And this also reminds me of the example of whatever, a patient on an operating table, right?
Yes.
Or back in the day
I love it.
when they want to figure out how does the human body work, right? And as soon as you start taking pieces and looking at it, like you grab an organ, before you know it, the thing has died, and this is no longer a part of the thing, right? But
It's
you
just
you
an
say, oh,
object,
this is
yeah.
an organ, that's an organ. So we've laid out all the organs, but guess what?
There's no patient.
There's not a living thing anymore. You've killed it.
Yeah. So imagine trying to hold a conversation with it as you're dissecting it like that. Right? Something about that picture is really, really off, and yet that's how because if you don't consider these little aspects of it, and you start to believe that the top right-hand corner is what order is, which to the mind, that's what it wants. It wants to rest there because that would be the sound bite, right? That's like it can capture this, it can use it. It feels good to really recognize
the
it.
fiat. This is also the creation of a model in the neural OS and all that.
It's also an arbitrary configuration in that things obtain very arbitrary values. Like, for instance, the length of the stick is somehow now one of the things that is being measured,
Which
even
is
though
ridiculous.
Even though it has nothing to do with what that branch is.
Now, there is this interesting dichotomy here going on where, yes, you can take, like, say the top image here. When you're trying to figure out the order of the system, this is a superficial investigation, right? But you can investigate deeply into deeper and deeper layers of how the cells are working, how the juices are coming through the stem, and like all these things. So the mind can create the models necessary to almost create life. But there's a limit that it approaches. This is the limit of fiat. That fiat can never actually describe reality itself, which is on the other side of the wall, kind of. Right?
Well, yeah. So I think what you're getting at is a fundamental linguistic limit.
Yeah, you approach a limit. This is a fundamental limit of modeling.
It's the Goodells and Completeness Theorem, and really what that talks about is, mathematically speaking, once you start getting a system that is this sophisticated, it will become self-contradictory. You cannot have a complete system that is not also self-contradictory, and that self-contradiction does not really feel good when you're trying to model something, and so people in general don't go past this problem.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it doesn't happen. We have a whole bunch of prior art before this, so this is not a new conversation.
Right. And this reminds me of the problem of scientism, I guess, that you never approach let's say you approach truth, but you never
but it's contextualized.
You never prove anything. You can only kind of disprove things, right?
Yeah, and things are only valid within some sort of context. There's no nothing about it that should be considered universal. Very few things can be, if at all. And the deeper that question has been dug, I mean, like, look at. I'm by no means an expert on the subject, but with the string theorists, the more they try to consolidate, the more an explosion they have of possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a big problem in terms of symbolizing something.
Yeah, so we've gone very deep into this endeavor, and we seem to hit that limit again and again.
Yeah, but the limit happens simply because if you don't account for flippings. Like, if you start to flip meaning around, like we just did, chaos and order and meaning, these layers aren't recognized, right? But if you start to see that in a layer this whole thing rearranges, then you can move past the contradiction, right? The contradiction only happens if you try to use them as those two contexts at the same time. They don't work. It's
right.
It's like trying to do the particle and the wave thing at the same time.
I hear that it sounds like you're saying you have to keep coming back to the tree of life, quote unquote, or the model, and keep using that as a source. But it never extracts, you never extract the order out of it.
No.
You just have to keep having that relationship with it.
Exactly. So every time you have something ordered, you got to go back to its chaotic elements, so to speak. Right. This is all like high level.
And you never want the order and your view of the order to be projected onto the chaos forever, or onto the model forever.
Yeah, it only ever makes sense in a context. So like this picture. To a biologist, for example, who is trying to study what is the maximum length of a branch when it has under such and such conditions, and lining them up like this makes sense. It does not make sense to line them up like this if you're trying to grow the damn thing.
Yep. True story.
So, with the flipping of the so the biggest takeaway is that when you notice that there is a flipping of what order and what chaos is, it means you've gone up a layer. And now you're looking at that layer, looking back at the previous layer and saying, I don't get you. You need to be this way for it to be digestible, right? And so for a tree to be digestible in terms of words, you have to separate each one into its own word. You have to have, this is the needle, this is a stick, this is a smaller stick, this is this is that, this is the other thing. And that dissection is not the real thing. It's a representation. Superstition is really taking that description and believing it, as opposed to seeing it as a description of something.
Right. A lot of that going around. Going to hit a break quick. I'm down for that. Be right back. Fine. Good. Where were we?
We was discussing the
System model dynamics.
Yeah, we're going into that now. Yeah, the commodification interplay, which we're going to get into plateaus afterwards. So we did order and chaos, the flipping problem, if you will. That's not a problem, it's just something that occurs. But without cognizant realization of this occurrence, things get really messed up with believing one of the representations, ignoring the other representation, and which amounts to essentially neglect.
So there's always this perspective of what is the order part that we're talking about. And the dichotomy fundamentally, in a simple term, seems to be the model that's being built. I shouldn't say the word model, but the idea of the apprehension of what's being built in the neural operating system versus the actuality of the life form complexities.
And all of its other potentialities, like outside of whatever little system that you're thinking of. That goes for anything, really. Like everything has these sort of crisscrossing.
Right. So if we call life chaos and we try to harness it into some kind of slave farm or whatever, right? Life is actually order, and we are a chaos in a sense, and we are introducing chaos into that, right? So there's always two ways of looking at it.
So like if we were to look back at that picture, I just want to speak to what you just said. If you look at that picture of the twig.
Back to the twig.
Yeah, if what you're saying basically, if you were to introduce, or if you're thinking of life as chaos and you're introducing this order, so which means we're looking at the top part of that picture right now. Well, from the perspective of life, right? It just got mangled.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you look at the top, sure, that makes sense. We've tamed our chaos. We've made order out of it. We've analyzed everything. We put everything in its place. But look at it from the other perspective, and you've just completely destroyed it.
Right. And this is an extreme. This meme is created to show an extreme of chaos versus order.
Yeah.
When we actually try to impose order upon a tree, that may just be something like watering it or giving it fertilizer, right?
But that's working with its original sense of order, rather than what we would consider to be our analysis.
Our idea of order can be very, very far off, is I guess the point.
Arbitrarily. It can be very arbitrary. As the top picture will show you, like this is just one possible arrangement of this, right? You can take it out and analyze it in terms of chemistry and say this is fiber, this is not fiber, not chemistry, just base material. Where the fiber, where the protein, where everything else is. You can go to the chemical and just like say, okay, this is carbon, this is oxygen, this is hydrogen, this is that. And in each step, like it depends on which layer you go through. But if you tackle one layer, the top layers disappear. Right? If you break it down into a layer below itself, it's going to disappear. It's like taking the organs out of a human.
Yes, if you interfere with that internal order. So this whole idea kind of just makes me want to bring up a point about when we are implementing an overlay of order onto structures, maybe human structures or people together, a corporation. We're always going to have this problem where we are trying to create and assert an order, but that order must be sensitive to the underlying order of life onto which it's being applied. Yeah. And so there's always going to be this, or has to be this dynamic if something's going to sustain through time.
Right. Otherwise, what you're really doing is introducing a lot of entropy.
Yeah.
Into this pre-existing system, and that's
Yeah.
That's actually not going to. That doesn't work.
By
So considering entropy always increases, that this can't actually sustain
Right.
itself.
So we're imposing a significant layer, something that we think, oh, this is going to be great. That's a very significant thing. Imposing it onto a very complex thing which we have no apprehension of, and it's just going to go to chaos. It's going to
Well, but it's
decay.
like it's like a child taking apart the radio and not being able to put it back together. Really, curiosity is great. There's a certain ritual involved
Right.
in making it right.
And so this is a very deep point, which I think is almost always missed whenever we try to convey or explain the types of things we're doing. It's always assumed, oh, you know everything, you know all this and that. Well, okay, I also know that I know nothing, and that everything has to be a dynamic and a constant learning process, right?
Yeah, like the
This has
extent
come up
of
so many times.
the extent of the knowledge isn't about
Yeah, it just can't be perceived that we are, or apparently it's very difficult to perceive that we are,
subject to the same problems.
right? And building a structure to deal with that itself, the very complaint that's being raised,
Yeah.
is at the core of what we would first try to convey to you.
Yeah.
This is the first thing we would ever try to explain to anybody.
Yeah,
And it's the first thing ever used to try and cut our work down.
It's weird. Yeah, it's just a really funny situation.
Just live and learn. Like anybody who tries to explain this kind of stuff will always fall into and see this stuff happening.
Yeah, but you know what? It doesn't matter. Just plow forward. And
Yep. Just keep doing it.
Yeah. So again, having covered order and chaos the way we did, we can now move into what we call the system model, the commodification interplay, which is a very necessary subject to understand if you're to understand why, after all of this discussion about how all of this goes wrong, we would still go and create what we call a corporation and an institution and still go that route.
Right.
And talk about the state and the corporation and
Yeah.
effectively current systemic problems that we are apparently trying to sort of resolve. And this is really at the heart of why that direction is what it is. And it is another variation of what we just talked about. So,
Yep.
it's a more specific way to look at the order chaos dynamic. And it's actually what happens as a chaos and order are when you have a given chaos and an order that's trying to like sort of implement itself upon it or impose itself upon it, i.e. the fiat that forms between the two things. This is all conceptual things, like we're not talking about physical objects. In that situation, basically, when that phenomena happens, we have a dynamic in which the chaotic aspect is trying to. It's not trying to. It's not an animate object, but for the sake of explaining it, it's trying to represent itself in some way that reflects order. So, for example, if you're looking at a bunch of photons, right? Our vision is nothing more than a bunch of photons entering the eye. There's a process that happens that says, okay, this one is of this wavelength, that one is that wavelength, these are interpreted as colors, blah 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 blah. Long story short, you get a line between objects, you get all of these different
Right.
separated things. So your visual view is now not a complete mess of like this photons, unless you're blind or have other problems, but a distinct picture of objects in space, right? And the recognition of those objects, despite the fact that it comes from a mesh of photons coming into your eye, is what we're trying to describe as a order appearing out of a chaos, right?
Yep.
And okay, so having that as a basis, there's this what we would call a commodification interplay, because another part that plays into this perception is expectation. In other words, your previous experiences with objects are going to feed into how you're seeing the current objects. Simple example of that would be to take a look at people who have had blindness from childhood, who had their vision restored. I found a great example of a situation in which a man lost his eyesight at 3 years old. So he had normal eyesight up until that point, had an accident that made him lose his vision, had an operation in his adult years which restored the vision, and then the consequences of having lost his vision at 3 and his ability to see since the operation, what does that look like? And interesting things came up in things like depth perception, the ability to tell apart the fact that an object is at a different depth than another object, or if it's just a line drawn between on a flat surface between two different textures, for example, like things like that. The expectation, like for a person who's been seeing their whole life, right? They're very used to it. They don't even think about it. They know this is a curve. They know that this is a step. They know that this is an apple versus a picture of an apple, for example. Things like that, which this person is actually had a very hard time doing. The information was there, but the expectation to process this information was simply not being applied the same way. And so what was seen, the way that the tapestry of photons got subdivided into concrete things in his vision were very different because of it. And you actually get similar things happening when you have forest tribes versus open fields and things like that.
Yeah, your other example.
Depth perception is a very different
The parallax.
thing. Yeah, another example.
Like you see when you wobble your head, you see things far away, they'll move slightly in relation to each other. Things close up, you'll see them go, like if your hand is still,
they move faster, yeah.
That moves very fast in my vision, but some two objects behind each other are very slightly moving.
And so the example with the forest tribes is that they don't experience the parallax effect since their field of view is limited to the tree line, which is never too far away, never more than like 100 feet or so. And so for them,
that seems a bit weird though. You'd think there would be parallax. There must be still.
It's not as pronounced. Like if you bring that person out into an open field and to show them a herd, they showed him a herd in the distance, and he couldn't grasp the fact that they were big and in a distance versus small and nearby. Like the whole experience.
The shock of never having seen a distance.
So the whole experience literally terrified the poor individual. So all of this is to
commodification
to understand to understand the relationship between how a chaotic aspect and an ordered aspect come together. So we're looking at about the same thing in both the chaotic sense and the ordered sense. In the chaotic sense, we were looking at a tapestry of photons. In the ordered sense, we're looking at the picture made out of those photons, right, and how it was made.
Yeah.
And the point I'm trying to raise is that you can have the same information on the one hand, the chaotic information, and the ordered information can take on many different shapes to represent it, right? To display it. And so some of them are better than others, as we can probably see. Some of them are just consequences of...
Some people know how to see that already very accurately, and some do not know how to see it.
Yeah, it's like there's different qualities to it, and then there's different variations on the theme as well. Like
And I thought that just quickly, this kind of gets into that, having so nerve, optical nerve, translating into a signal, right? And then up the stack into symbol, artifact, and all this.
Yeah, so the signals might all be the same, but the symbols conveyed to the rest of the stack might be very different, right? So that's like the symbol. Oh, there's a step here versus
Ask
there's a
Questions welcome. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So this is where we're getting into this whole interplay. So the model being the thing that is accepting these inputs, the system being the representation of those inputs in the ordered sense, right? So what we're seeing the effect of is like the model is trying to create a system, any kind of system to represent it. So it'll grab what works. It doesn't care whether this is the correct representation completely. It just commodifies this one versus that one versus this one in context, right? So if it sees a step, you'll step over it. If it doesn't see a step, you'll think it's a flat surface, right? It's using whatever system available for interpretation at the time.
Right.
So it's very agnostic regarding which system it's using. It doesn't care. Right? It just wants to function. So this is the one aspect of it. It commodifies any system, right? From the systemic point of view, a system tries to unify, conceptually unify everything, to have a single layered version of the entire thing, right? And so it's very averse to other descriptions. And this is the conflict. As the model is commodifying this system and this system and this system to do its thing, these systems become, as they grow in complexity, all right, as attention is given to them by various individuals and whatnot, they grow,
right?
And they grow in their own self-consistency. But self-consistency brings contradiction. Sorry, not self-consistency. Self-consistency brings incompletion. Meaning, if they're going to be self-consistent, they're going to be incomplete. This is again the Gödel problem with language. You either have a complete system that's contradictory, or a non-contradictory system that's incomplete, but never both. And so these systems start to try to push each other out due to their inherent contradictions. And so what it's doing is basically it's saying, okay, the system is saying, okay, I'm representing the model is this, the model is this, the model is this. But because this model, it keeps trying to introduce different system to it, this one particular system will say no. Right? It's going to be like, no, this is not the correct model. Right? And it would then go ahead and commodify this model into a simpler version that reflects itself and cuts out the other complexities that are involved,
right,
that were inherent to it. And this is the commodification of the model from the system's perspective, in that it takes the actual model that has created it, replaces it with a caricature of itself, and moves on so that it can exclude all other models. And so this is the commodification interplay. So on the one hand side, you got something that commodifies literally everything under the sun, so long as it's useful at the time, and it doesn't have a regard for a consequential sort of upkeep. It doesn't need that model after the fact. It's in the moment. Whereas the other part is like self-maintaining, and when that in the moment arrives, it has like, well, how do I tackle that question? How do I exist in that space? Yes, and so forth and so forth. And so when the model says you don't, it doesn't necessarily compute, right? The system cannot understand its own death, so to speak. It doesn't speak that language. It doesn't have it. It doesn't have our whole archetype stack in accounting for it, if the model didn't bring that into it in the first place.
Yes.
Which it normally wouldn't. It has no need to do so. We're talking about energy conservation.
We are doing that.
So, but because of that, from energy conservation point of view, it makes sense to not do that, which is why we don't have the habit of doing this, which is why we went as far with our systems as we have, with their ability to completely take the model out of the picture in the first place. And only after, as a consequence of this, is it realized that, hey, doing this is detrimental, which is why the model now has to be brought back in as an artifact, a completely artificial concoction, through this system, which will fight tooth and nail to completely reject the premise. As in, no, this is the way things work. Why would you tack on other systems again to fight me? And its inability to recognize it is its fundamental problem of every system, which is why the system in and of itself can never be a complete way of realization of anything. It fights these kinds of it fights the process, this kind of process, because it's not energy efficient for it.
Yeah, it kind of wants everything to be ideal. And when we're saying model, we're talking like about the tree of life, so to speak.
In this picture, it would be the order in the bottom left corner. That's like the model. It knows it's self-modeled. It's
the inexplicable, like it's arising out of chaos and order. But it's an order that you see as truth.
It's a self-made order.
There's a certain truth in it that all untruths have been shed through time.
Through death.
Yeah.
Literally.
And all that's left is the truth in some ways. You see a tree, you know it's alive.
Yeah.
That's the model. That's model.
That's literally the version that worked out.
To try and pick it apart and see why is it, that's attempting to infuse that ideal order into it, which
particular system,
which itself wants to complete and be a complete system, but it never can. It can only have this relationship with the model.
It can only have a contextual representational relationship. So it will need context, and it will need a lifetime.
Right.
And that is something that a system generally doesn't recognize, because it's too simplistic to include the life-death cycle to begin with.
And so everything we're building here with our products and this ability to articulate systems with, say, index cards, this is all attempting to keep that in mind, that it is always a relationship. And
it's a transient relationship, and that a system is a thing that comes about and dies as soon as the circumstances arise, and as soon as the circumstances dictate, respectively.
And systems within systems, like the lifetime of a person kind of as a system, so to speak.
Yeah, all of these biological systems, social systems, intertwined together. With the biological systems helping out the social systems, or the social systems helping out the biological systems.
Oh, Eon's doing some of his game. Should have made that more explicit. It's because this link got... preview got killed. And it's still saying guild dynamics, whatever. Either way. That is the link. Can do later.
Yeah, so that's the dynamic that got me the reputation that I have with SOTs.
Right. Yeah, it's a little tricky.
Trying to explain
and
this perception.
The irony of it is that people tend to really have an intuition that you can't just impose a system on things. It's not going to work. Right?
Yeah.
And they perceive that what we're saying, what we just said, is imposing a system on something.
Well,
and
it surely is.
Boom.
But the system, but this particular system is only about itself, which means it's only perceiving things like, hey, I'm doing this already. Like I'm becoming this system that's going to be transient and I'm
Yeah.
going to disappear. And that's like
Right.
the extent of. So this is a system with a kill switch.
Huge irony, though. But anyways,
It's
lessons
it's
learned.
ironic in many ways than one, because in a sense this dynamic is exactly the exposition of the event. It's like literally I described the event before it happened,
Yeah.
and the event ensued. And then when I demonstrated
Right.
that this is the event I'm talking about, the event continues.
That's.
It's kind of
I've tried
that's
to
the
do that many,
that's
many
the
times.
weirdest part
you,
to it.
You can't pull people out into the meta.
No,
very
and
often.
if you don't want to be pulled out anywhere, stay where you are. It's fine.
You're fine where you are.
Just leave us
don't
alone.
get in the way. Yeah.
Okay, so
Commodification.
So this leads us to a state of things where model commodifies systems, system commodifies model. The model is trying to commodify everything under the sun as to be for its own inner workings, whereas the system tries to purge and be clean and lean and only like deal with whatever it's dealing with, and everything else be damned. And so the commodification of model in this sense is basically its replacement with a caricature that's simplified and simplified and simplified to the point of where it doesn't exist anymore. Just the system exists.
Yeah. And over time,
and it has no connection with anything anymore.
And we can walk this through the plateaus of commodification, even, or
no. At this situation, you have a plateau. Once the disconnected happened.
Yeah. That's what I mean, but there's different...
And then, there's different layering of plateaus depending on...
There's been a progression.
Yeah, it depends on how... and that progression has to do with what you can commodify initially, and then further on and further on. The first thing you commodify is the environment, because it's the most available thing that you can take away from people. Look, it's the most obvious in-your-face thing. The last thing you can commodify is mental time.
Yeah.
The control of to this minute you're thinking about that, this minute, like, so it's literally turning your brain into someone else's processing unit.
Yeah. Here we are.
On their own time, on their time, not yours, theirs.
Yeah.
All you get out of it is anxiety.
And all you can see is that reality.
Yeah.
That's just you're processing reality.
Yeah. Sure.
Somebody else's.
With that, I'm gonna go
Break time.
short.
Ready, ready, ready. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Cool.
All right, so we are fine. Do you want to switch maybe?
No.
We are finally at a point of where we can discuss what a plateau is. Having touched on the whole idea of the system commodifying the model and displacing it to the point of its sort of non-existence. It's having it based on nothing outside of its inner workings. So, for example, the modern economy system, which is based on the concept of a rational, what do you call them? A rational actor or a rational agent or something to that effect, that is going to maximize their decisions and blah 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 blah. So a great example of a system based in fundamentally in an imaginary world that doesn't exist, never existed, and will never exist. To say that human beings are rational maximizing beings is, well, it's just sad. It's a sad assessment of the state of affairs, because it reduces us to, first of all, it reduces us to machines. Like fundamentally,
this is what we just talked about, the system being the be-all end-all of everything.
Yeah, it reduces us to these machines that think in terms of money only, which is bullshit. Second off, it ignores a vast array of human activity that has nothing to do with gain, or anything to do with competition or having to.
It's just pure isomorphism.
Yeah, like most of human activity is breathing, eating, shitting, and sleeping. It has nothing to do with wanting shit. Wanting shit is a characteristic of an addiction.
Maximizing paper clips.
Yeah, like wanting things is more of a characteristic of an addiction. Especially if after you get that thing, you want one more thing, and if you want one more thing.
But the model requires sustenance.
Right.
So this is where you have demands of the model needing to be met by systemic structures.
Right.
And that's where you get commodification.
Right. So systemic structures, so long as what they're commodifying is the meeting of those demands, are isomorphic. As soon as you start to
that's a sketchy thing
so
to say. Because
commodification,
you can meet the demands in a very, very unethical way.
No, that's not what I'm referring to. That's not meeting a demand. That is playing fast and loose with what demands you'll meet, and that's a totally different game.
That is called supply and demand.
Yeah, this is
versus demand and supply.
Yeah, demand and supply is a slightly different ball game in that you cannot supply much that's going to destroy the ability to create to supply for other demands.
You can only do it for so long, and it can appear like it's sustainable up until the last moment.
But the key here is that none of it is done for an economic gain. It's not for the currency bit of it that's the driver. Because if currency is the driver, right, it becomes a very arbitrary goalpost. You're chasing a number. You're not chasing an outcome. And if you're chasing a number and not if your outcome is that number, then everything else can go sideways by the side road. Effectively what we would call neglect.
Right. So this is the problem of commodification, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and this is already demonstrated in the very first problem of the commodification interplay, in that the system at play will seek to displace that model for efficiency, to get rid of all the different aspects that constrain it.
Right.
To a specific way of
environmental.
Right. To make it not be able to do whatever algorithm it's trying to do, even though it's only supposed to ever do it here and there. It's never supposed to be something that does. Like with all good things, you can have too much. If you drink too much water, you'll die. Simple as that, right? But you still need to drink water to hydrate. So the point I'm trying to make there is that there's balance in everything, not in any kind this interaction needs to be done very, very carefully. It cannot, because once the model is displaced, getting it back into play is incredibly difficult, as we can probably see. We're struggling into even articulating the damn thing.
Like an island.
So yeah, back to plateaus and why they're important. Plateau is what you get after the model has been displaced, and a plateau is what remains after that fact, and essentially the system you have left over to play with to recreate the model out of. So these are your building blocks out of which you can now attempt to reassert the model back into whatever system you find yourself in, which in our case happens to be the very last commodification plateau. We're in.
Yep. Did you want to go through, describe these? I guess we're looking at the bottom.
Yeah. So we're basically we're
or the middle step.
We're between. So the plateau. We're on the temporal tampering and the tunneled reality. We're in that middle between ground. If we ever reach tunnel reality, it's game over basically. But we're basically between those two things right now in this schema. I wouldn't take it too seriously in terms of like
actuality.
Yeah, like this is an abstract version of understanding. This is not meant to be taken too concretely. It's more of a pattern than it is a.
Yeah, but and also this is an explanation sort of, or a model of through time of how we've got here from the tribe to where we are now.
So temporal tampering simply it talks about Facebook and Twitter and all of that kind of stuff, where your time minute by minute is now adjusted for in terms of what you'll occupy yourself with through an external entity for profit of that entity, rather than anything to do with yourself.
Your 9 to 5 job, you get home, you start looking at the Facebook feed.
Yeah, and at that point you're Facebook's product. So they have a vested interest in you as a product doing activities.
Yeah,
at this point, at that point, at this point.
This is the attention economy too, right? Attention is time.
So this is what we're talking about when it comes to temporal tampering. A tunneled reality would basically be where.
But we should build up from the bottom though. We're going from tribe up to virtual state.
Oh yeah, we'll take care of that. But I wanted.
Although we walk through this yet?
No, I wanted to speak to this particular one is because this is the most familiar one. We're not at the point of where our land is being taken from us from a tribe as a tribe, right? We're not at the point of where our work life is being transformed into an industry. Like we're at the point of where our time is literally being slotted for us. Would be our free time, so to speak, is now being manipulated. So tunneled reality would be like the cusp of that, where you're just in that tunnel, and that's the beginning and the end of all the functions. Certainly not exactly where we are, but already a reality for a lot of people. We're not of the opinion that this is like the state of everybody per se, but
no,
that's the trajectory we're seeing.
Yeah, and the idea of tunneled reality, basically that, and getting back to this idea of the machine and the animal, the machine is able to make things completely arbitrary and move things around in meaning. The tunneled reality being that you're completely disconnected from basically everything.
Yeah, like the machine dictates what reality would be.
It's all arbitrary. Yep.
Bound up by arbitrary, we mean it literally is bound up in the language. the words are the real thing versus what the words are supposed to be representing in the first place.
Right, and that allows you to completely disconnect and to never have that feedback of what does this mean? You know, like how identity politics and all that fight against each other, saying, oh, you're a racist, oh, you're this and bigot and whatever.
Yeah,
those become reality that you're in, and you can never break down, okay, you called me a racist, but what did I actually do? Right? You can never go there anymore. You're in the tunneled reality. You never break down to actual occurrences and events.
Yeah, look, so we're talking at the narrative layer at that point, and never touching on any point and underneath that as to like, okay, well, what is the source of the narrative? Like, how did it come together?
You can never break it down.
It's only like being taken at its superficial sort of stages where it's already a complete thing and has a specific meaning only in that context only, and that context is constantly being rebrought back into play, and any discussion regarding it is being ejected simply as again that mechanic of the commodification, as a commodification interplay again, where the model is being rejected in favor of continuation of the systemic explanation, and this, so we're getting like a pre-programmed response. Regardless of context, it creates for a very disconnected,
rigid, dead, crusty, and this constitutes all of society. At some point, this is what as people move into the tunneled reality, this is what all the people around you, even if you're able to try and pick apart things, what is the meaning of this, you're running up against people who you had the wrong appearance, you are now labeled, you are shunned, end of story. Nothing you say or do matters. You cannot try to bring up the meta or the context of the situation. It's a sign was given, you gave the wrong sign, you're done, finished.
This is a huge problem for that interplay, in that the systemic application is fundamentally rigid, regardless of approach, really. It doesn't matter whether it's this system that we're talking about, it's still going to have that rigidity to it, in that certain terms are accepted, certain terms are not, certain terms have to be explained this way, others are this way. And literally, this is like isolating itself into its own little dialect, and that's all fine. On its own, it's all fine. It's a matter of knowing, again, context, where to place it. Where does it apply? If it doesn't apply here, then it's not.
You're saying that commodification and systematization is not wrong in itself.
No, it can't be wrong. Otherwise, nothing can be done.
Right.
Again, going back to the body being a machine is a system. A system needs inputs, system needs outputs. These things are not wrong. They are simply just another layer. It's literally all about how that layer now comes back and what it does with the layers it came from. So
you were smoking a cigarette. Bad boy. Are you implying ontology by stating that the tunnel is that of arbitrary meaning relationships?
I'm not sure how to answer that. No, probably not. Maybe.
Yeah, like a rigid ontology, the failed ontology, I think.
Arbitrary meaning. Well, it's a relationship between words.
Everything is always sort of arbitrary.
Yeah, like when you get to the problem is, though, I think we're touching on, is that words can only talk about words, and so if you start believing words instead of whatever the hell the words are representing, then you're in that reality tunnel, and so you get the ontology and whatnot. I'm hoping that answers the question.
Perhaps.
the trick, I guess, that we're implying to it is that if you keep that in mind, you have the option of stopping a reality tunnel with one ontology, starting up a new one as you see fit. And the trick there, of course, is to be disciplined enough not to be willy-nilly with it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not something you should do, to weasel yourself out of situations, for example, which is what a lot of people would take this as.
Right.
It's literally nothing to do with weaseling out of situations, but a recognition that, oh, this context requires a completely different ontology for this moment, right? Again, an ontology is not wrong. An ontology is necessary. An ontology is how we survive. But if your ontology is giving you constant anxiety, something is off. That's really the fundamentals of it. Nothing is everything is arbitrary, but everything is arbitrary in context. Like it's not we're not making universal statements here. We're making contextual ones. If you can try to, like,
to me, this is
the
embedding phenomenon, the embedding of carriers, that you would always have natural and fundamental guilds embedded into whatever it is that you're doing at any moment, and that's what allows you to take that self-reflection and step back and do the meta of any situation.
Yeah. It's to basically ensure that you grow your language out of the notion of consistency and into the notion of completeness, which has contradiction in it. So going back to the idea of Goodells' theorem, the only thing we're really saying is that when you create a system, if it's going to be complete, you're going to have a contradiction. If you're not going to have contradiction, you will have an incomplete system. Keep this in mind. That completes the system, allows for contradiction, and you can move forward. It's really all about that. It sounds a lot simpler than it is to actually do, because again, the mind is systemic, very systemic. It
keeps doing that.
It's there to help you survive, and so it has to assert a system that allows it to do that.
Yeah. Welcome, buddy. Welcome. So how can we, what were we moving towards anyway? So we've got commodification sort of going. Did we describe commodification, the plateaus?
So we didn't go into the details of the plateau aside from the fact that we're talking about time. What was it? Time...
Tempering?
Temporal tampering, yeah. So we established that we're at least on that plateau. We didn't really state what that means outside of it being like Facebook killing your time and all of that stuff. But we can elaborate more about that, or we can move on to the guild dynamics, sort of countering what guild dynamics does to approach the commodification.
I don't think we're really getting into the plateaus today, although we probably should if we haven't done it yet.
Yeah, it just means that we're going to need to go over this at some other point, like we are doing with this right now.
Yep.
That's what I would say there. So we can leave it at temporal tampering. We can potentially answer any questions that arise that come from different ones. But we should probably move to guild dynamics. So this is going to go back into our previous discussion and how that actually connects with the system, the model, and the commodification interplay. Like, because effectively the guild dynamics is what we wedge in between those to sort of give that balance back to the model being able to pick its systems on the need to, as the need arises, and to be able to,
which has to be a function of the systems,
which has to be a function of what the system it's using. So guild dynamics becomes that system for it, And the only thing, and its only job is to simply say, hey, there's more systems out there. To keep that in mind, keep this in mind. So it winds up being a system. It is one of many such systems, by the way. It's not the only one you can use this for.
Oh, there's Eon there too on YouTube. Take questions from YouTube. Yeah, YouTube chat's fine.
Yeah,
Go for it, Eon. Thanks, buddy. welcome.
Yeah, so Guild Dynamics becomes that system. It's one of many systems. It's a system picked specifically for the current plateau. Other such systems that, to my mind, that have worked really well. My personal favorite is Buddhism, which straddles a very different commodification plateau and originates in a very different time, but effectively stating very much the same thing about what's going on. Just a very different language, very different metaphors, and it really is a product of its own time, using the common language of the era.
Mm-hmm. And just a note, Eon, talking about the tunnel, the reality tunnel as kind of a game over phase. So you described being at the tunnel plateau as game over, and that a tunnel is basically a linguistic simulation where meaning is arbitrated by, and then the question is the machine, you said, or number, I forgot, by the system overwhelming.
So it would be the disconnect, the system which has now been severed from the model via commodifying its
practically completely. So
taking the model, commodifying it as a caricature of itself, and then evacuating any substance out of that caricature for the simple purpose of making that system more and more efficient for itself.
Right.
So the algorithm for the algorithm, and so what happens at that point? Anything to do with life is sort of is not meaningful to it, and everything you do in it is not meaningful to you.
Right. Now, I think we have to inject a certain concept here, which is the breakaway civilization, and as well the priest class, as we brought up in the past, is that not everybody can be under this complete reality tunnel simulation, or you'll have different classes of people under that simulation. Some of them are actually have to manage the processes of life to sustain the thing, and other people don't have to know about that or care. Never can know. So you've got controllers, sort of, and then the general population, I guess.
Yeah, so this is where you get the classes. So why we have a power structure to begin with and all that. So the owner class, the priest class, and the worker class generally is
right.
How we had it. I haven't delved too far into this. My terminologies are not consistent yet.
Yeah. So this leaves the working class or whatever at not having to know anything about shit all except their own little job, and that's it.
Yeah, which severs them from ability to affect anything.
Yeah, you cannot change.
Meaningful.
You can't change the system, and this kind of gives us that vision of how it can enclose over you and trap you into the thing.
And on the flip side, the people who would be able to do any change are incentivized not to by the system, right?
Right, your family's going to die, etc.
So that's the hurdle right there.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to speak to what I meant by game over. So there's this thing I've been calling to one of the options is called disintegration. I forget what I used for the other term. So basically, this is as a commodification plateau. The system would be moving through cycles of reform, right? Constant reform, which increases its internal entropy, right? Reform is what actually removes the model from the process because it becomes more and more about the system.
Right.
These reforms get into a situation of tension with the actual stacks becoming more and more in conflict with each other. Sustainability becomes a problem for people. People start dying, is what I mean. Eventually, that points to a threshold where enough is enough, and there you have a revolutionary cycle. Revolution normally reestablishes the system for another cycle of reform, and another cycle of revolution, and so on and so forth, until you reach the breaking point of the whole thing, at which point you have complete disintegration, like aka the collapse of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, good times.
So that's the end game. You have complete disintegration where the ruling class, all the classes, everything gets completely mangled in terms of separation. There's a huge mix-up, and once enough of that top layer is skimmed off, right? Once enough of that layer is skimmed off to alleviate that pressure on the population, this disintegration reestablishes itself, and the growth begins again. And if the lessons never learned as to why it happened,
Yeah, right.
the same established structures get in place.
Yep. And through time, we've learned a lot of lessons.
Some of the model is brought back out of sheer necessity, but not recognized as such. Like the fundamental of this has happened because we removed it does not occur.
Yeah.
And so the maintenance of it goes through the exact same cycle of reform until complete removal, revolutions, and entire disintegrations again, over and over and over and over. And so this is the pattern. That's the end game. Once you get that reality tunnel thing, pretty much the only thing you can expect is to follow is the non-existence of of that reality. And another variation of it coming together from another source, somebody else establishing the same ownership bullshit over territory.
Yeah.
The commodification starts to begin again, and we're right back to where we started, and
again.
Nothing's changed. And so here we are in round 20.
Yeah. So we're trying to learn some lessons here.
That's about it. Yeah. So that's the end game. If you want to
and
understand that.
One challenge here is basically what we could call responsibility. And that is the reality that we create inside our heads has to account for the other layers, our world around us, and all this stuff. This is what we have to become responsible for. If we don't, we hit this breakaway civilization thing where we're just the worker class and we have no idea how anything works. Period.
And funnily enough, a lot of people are freaking proud of being that stupid.
True.
I don't know about computers, don't teach me. Okay. Except they run everything.
Yeah, that's not cool anymore, though. That used to be cool like 10 years ago, not to know about computers.
Oh, my parents still do it.
10,
as
15.
if it's a thing.
They still do.
And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah,
maybe
but
it's a generation.
I'm not going to come over every day.
People die off, too.
It's weird. Anyway, so that's the gripe. That's a personal gripe of mine.
Yeah.
So let's not get too complicated on that one. I don't need everybody to know computers.
Nope. So Jan says, I can see this historical pattern model being a fractal where you say the core is, in this situation of reform, revolution and dissolution. Wait, was that a question? Where you say the core is in this situation.
Where
of
would you say the core is
Oh,
in
where
a
would-
situation? Reform. So the core. How do I understand that?
revolution and dissolution. Yeah.
So the core is still. I would say the core is this.
The model that keeps
the
living.
system model system model commodification interplay would be. Yeah, no, I noticed. Yes. You clarified. I clarified for you. I clarified your clarification, Ian. Yeah, the core would be the system model commodification interplay that we were talking about. It's the fact that as the model keeps commodifying various systems, these systems grow, right? They don't die after they've been commodified. these systems grow on their own after the fact. People invest time into making them work better, but eventually they come into conflict. When they do that, they start to push each other out, right? And one of the first things to go is actually the model, which has been creating all of these commodifications of systems to begin with, because it's the source of all of these differences. And it's very allergic to these differences.
So stop being so unique.
Right. It's just like, this means that. It's just like when we appropriate all of Buddhism, or we appropriate Christianity to say that the Grand Master is Jesus and all that stuff. It's exactly the same point, where we just we're killing off the other way of explaining it, and saying, no, it's this way. So that's the commodification a system does to all concepts around it, right? The model is like, i.e. the mind thinking these things, is so free to pick whatever system works for it at the time that it doesn't have to be concerned with it. But once you have an established system in your head, things will start to become right and wrong. And because of that, like, you get these pain responses, right, within your psyche for trying to do something a different way. There's an addictive factor to it, where doing something according to a system gives you a high.
We like it when our model when reality reflects our model back to us. How we think reality is, that's how it seems to be.
There's a dopamine hit involved.
Feels good.
And so once that gets complicated enough, and you start to actually introduce a second complicated model for the same thing, your mind's like, what? No, right? Like, you have that it's an instinctive reaction, and it makes sense if you're in a tribe trying to survive, right? Like, you don't have a fallback to like lean on and think it through and all of that stuff, because if you don't do shit this way, you die. So back where this stuff developed, it was perfectly fine for it to be a single thing. But we're not in that stage anymore.
This reminds me as well of just evolution itself, or the idea of different life forms moving through space and time. And so you have a divergence of two things into maybe different environments. One becomes obviously unviable and it's gone, but what's left is the one that's still viable. That's kind of the core that keeps being, you may have to maybe many branches come off the outside, and you're just left with the trunk. That's your core.
And it's always the same interplay here, because we're talking about the order and chaos interplay in a concrete sense, right? It's guesswork, obviously, but that's the guess there. That would be the real reason behind both the revolution, both the reform, the neglect, the commodification plateaus. All of that has to do with the interplay of commodification itself. Having been allowed to take our time, sit back and think about it, allowed us to create a really fucked up interplay. By fucked up, I mean it's just like it if we were to do this again, if we, as a tribe, like, we would simply starve or freeze or any one of those things that would cause us to die from the neglect of taking care of ourselves. The only reason we have this much ability to fuck it up is because we have so much time on our hands in which we can do nothing and not die from it.
Right, and this comes back to the first plateau, even.
Yeah, that's where it starts.
The animals aren't, and shit isn't coming to kill you anymore because you have a wall around your city-state.
Yeah, like you got that benefit interplay, like, right? This is why systems get adopted. They work, not because they don't work, obviously.
Yeah.
It's just that when they're misapplied or applied to things that they don't belong to.
Right.
Same thing.
The interesting part is that society still has to take into account all the things the tribe ever took account for. Like when people who have to actually go out and hunt or go out and do stuff, they still have to be very careful. In the same way a tribesman had to be careful, and they need to use the same hunting tools and the same this and that. but now it's specialized into
Yeah.
a plateau, and that's just a special little job, and most people don't have any idea what goes on beyond the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, different times have different different scenes of that.
Yeah, just generalizing. Yeah.
But that's the gist of it. Yeah. So we can move on to corporation, institution, guild dynamics, flipping, and go from there.
Mm-hmm. So we basically been talking about this somewhat with the commodification stuff, where you're having, say, the institution advertises a need, and the corporation forms to supply that need, right?
Mm-hmm.
That need request is made in the form of a commodity. I need this commodity, basically, right?
Yep.
You can't express anything without saying I need this thing or that thing, and then society or somebody out there knowing what you mean by that.
Well, we
thing.
don't even have a language for it anymore. When you call an object, you're calling it by its category anyway, right? You don't you never talk about like this specific custom-made thing that only one of exists in the universe, kind of a thing, right? That I can create a name for it and out of the blue, which is how things used to be made for the most part, until with certain patterns, of course, making it.
Yeah.
Whereas now, anything you might be asking for is mass-produced, really.
Right, which is what you would expect, sort of. But maybe any request or any commodity has certain properties, which can be very variable.
It's just the fact of being on a plateau. I'm saying, like, you have to work through the commodity spectacle itself, right, to actually attain anything. So if you're after shelter, not as a commodity, but as a function, you still have to go out into the world and get a commodity representing shelter out of it, and then make that utility of it, right? So there's it's just all it is another layer of thought. It's a layer that makes things more complicated. It's a layer that's unnecessarily complicated, but it's a layer we have to live with. And that's actually what the plateau is saying there. Like, we have to deal with that layer. So all of these interactions now are double layered. Like, you have the commodity part to it.
So
and
you're
the
saying that
reality.
the plateau gives you a set of commodities, some baseline commodities that now you can only ask for this. You can't really break it down into such complexities.
You can't go out into the environment. You can go on somebody's property.
Yeah.
The whole idea of an environment out there, that's a joke. It hasn't existed in at least 100 years, as far as actual planet-wise, and conceptually it didn't exist for at least 1,000 years because people didn't think this way anymore. There's no such thing as an environment. There's land to conquer.
Jan says, I want what my machine corporate overlord calls food to facilitate the category of neurochemical reaction called satiation. That's what
that is an appropriate want.
Very how institutional of you.
That is a desire I can get right behind as a Buddhist.
Yep. True that.
Yeah, that's...
So I think we're getting into the Institute Corp mediated by commodity.
Yeah, this is the function of the corporation and institution. So the institution is a set of demands. Like, you can look at it as a set of demands, and these demands are actually a reflection of the demands of the body and the mind.
And so just to relate this back to our previous discussion just now, or lately, when we say institution, we're talking about the model side of things, sort of.
Yeah, it's with the Guild Institute.
And where would you expect needs and demands to come from, aside from the life itself?
Yeah, the makeup of the institution is the members.
Never mind what you think about it and your models and the systems and all this kind of stuff. You're hungry. that's it. You're cold. Period. Like
Yeah,
this is
like,
the
this is-
institutional side of the request.
Yeah, we're not talking about a legal law-given institution of any kind.
Yeah, so this is kind of a model-specific term that we use for institution.
It's a more traditional use of the word institution of an assembly of people coming together for a purpose. So that's where that came from.
Right.
It's a very basic definition, and it just seems to fit well enough into the rest of the context.
What constitutes a demand of the mind? Eon says.
Well, Eon, does your mind demand an answer to this question? Think about it, because you're actually hitting.
Yeah.
You're actually hitting the answer with the question itself. Like, you got to think about why this question popped in your head in the first place. The mind demands completion. If anything, if it has an incomplete concept, it wants to complete it. If it has an incomplete story, it wants to find its ending. It wants resolution.
Thought that was funny.
I think you heard us.
Hit a quick break here.
Yep.
Minute or two, we'll be right back. You've got an idea, but we're getting low kilobytes. What does it mean? Our video is probably chopping, but I think our audio is probably good.
Alright, so I got another little input about the mind and what does it want, and the thought is basically, it's the mind and fiat are basically the same thing. It's like, what does the mind want? It wants gratification, right? It's moving from a state of potential to actual at all times, and so it wants to actualize the potential
Right.
that's currently is in its face, so to speak.
Get the dopamine hits.
Right. So if you want to look at the mind as a thing that wants something, it wants gratification. It wants that dopamine hit. It wants to avoid not getting that hit or anything that could potentially cause it that. And so the mind is effectively generates a shit ton of adrenaline for itself, and then becomes its own junkie.
Yeah.
That's the mind. So if you wanted to look at the mind as a thing, it's basically a really immature coke addict.
True story. I was going to bring up an image which we don't have pulled up currently, but you may know which one it is. God, Telegram sucks. Okay, we'll get a flash of this. The what do you call it? Conceitedness.
Yeah, so the mind is essentially working on in the right hand side of this diagram for the most part. With there's altruism, isomorphism and detachment involved, but it's not elements that get paid attention to. The feedback from these elements' existence does not really make it into any consideration.
Sorry, I'm just speeding along here. It is a cool chart. We've talked about this before. I wanted to try and get it into the into frame. So this is what the mind wants.
Yeah, it's just to keep satisfying the attachments, the aversions, and the callousness of its ongoing narrative, right? So that's why it's kind of like a fiat coke addict. It just operates in this kind of inner vacuum of its own creation. So what it wants is actually irrelevant, to be honest. What it needs is a very different story. Right.
And it's kind of an interesting question, because this seems to be what propels the system itself. It wants to be self-consistent, and it wants to be right.
Yeah. But, as we are saying, basically what it wants is actually fundamentally irrelevant to it. As long as it does not take itself into consideration,
right,
it's actually going to be stuck in that state of want without...
Are you conflating the mind with the brain?
No, I'm conflating it with an operating system.
And what does saying the mind demands dopamine imply about system model dynamics, which I think we're just talking about?
It implies that the model generally gets the boot.
Yeah, the system feels very good when it's right.
To qualify this a bit more, just think of the effort it's taking us to continue this conversation and continue to have this conversation despite all the resistance that we encounter from others, B, from ourselves, just trying to act out what we're saying is so fucking difficult.
But there's a systemic consistency to that too, which is just more subtle.
Of course, it's all part of the same jumbled mess. It's never going to be a different mess. That much we know. But working through what we've got is still a tall order.
Yeah, and you would expect that from a neurobiological perspective that these dopamine neurotransmitter type stuff would encourage that usage of system in a correct way, into where you use a system and it gives you the
and you got to think about where this is developed.
You get the feedback and it's correct.
When it developed, you didn't get the option of picking and choosing your systems, because you spend too much time doing that, you die.
Right.
You simply don't survive.
Yeah.
Because you need to feed yourself. That system was meant to feed you, not to imagine what stars are.
Without plateaus, things were very fragile.
Yeah, so you just couldn't spend that much time and effort into it. It would be such a waste of your life that you just wouldn't do it. Life simply demanded different mentality. Death was a constant friend. People weren't fearing death. They weren't fearing dying itself. They were fearing not being able to achieve something or the other thing, and that's about it.
Right.
The being afraid of life was not really a thing, or anxious about life.
Right. Your myth put your headspace into the order region, and the chaos stuff didn't matter as much to yourself personally.
Because it was already accounted for in the order.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those systems used to have the accounting of survival, because if they didn't, people wouldn't survive, obviously, and they wouldn't exist. It's only until the commodification plateau came into play and delayed that reaction, that death reaction, that we had the space to get a system in place that didn't actually deal with these directly.
Mm-hmm.
Which created the necessity for injecting such a system by fiat, which is why we get religion after religion after religion trying to dismantle the system that we have. They are missing other parts of the cycle, which is why they never did what they were supposed to do. Different blind spots of self-reflection always cause it.
Interesting.
So the only real thing to do is to take all of them, see what they've missed, and complete the damn thing.
Yep.
Which is really what this is all about.
Agreed. So we've got about we've got actually a lot of time left, but
An hour.
I wanted to, until we shut her down, kind of we're looking at about an hour, maybe even less, because we may have like an overtime session. You know what I'm saying? So let's just assume we have less, and say that we have another 45 minutes or something like
Yep.
that. So how can we have we almost wrapped up? So the institution and corporate mediated by commodity.
We never really went into much details.
That's kind of the last part, and then what I wanted to get into was the updating of the card box game prototype.
Yeah.
To kind of account for, okay, how do we concretely actually put a system together to represent and facilitate these kind of structures of organization in a way that's very kind of seems simple and all that kind of stuff. And talking about the model schema and all that, I want to get a bit deeper into the model schema. And commodification is a big part of that, because each say in the corporate stack, each office, you have an office, executive offices and a real estate office.
Mm-hmm.
These are providing commodities to the other parts of the stack, right? And so I want a way to represent what this office does, so how the carrier that it supplies to the rest of the stack to use and to interact with, right? And so that's the kind of what I'm seeing here that I want to represent with cards, just as a way of illuminating and expressing it.
Yeah. Okay.
So where else do we need to go for commodity between the institution and the corp?
I think this is where you should probably bring up the fractal.
We have a few more charts here.
The fractal chart, the triangle.
Bada boom.
Yeah. So.
Don't start yawning. People are at home. They're at home. Are gonna yawn too.
Sorry, guys. I can't really
resist.
Hard to.
Oh, good job, Wyndham. Good job.
That was brilliant.
Maybe this won't all appear in here anyways. So we got phenomena up at the very top there.
Yeah. This is good enough, because we really don't. This, yeah. If you can see it, it should be fine.
So.
Excuse me. All right. So this is an oldie but a goodie.
Yep. Pretty old chart.
So what kind? So this actually is going to speak about the kind of commodities that you would want to sort of start with, and also why. So beginning with temperaments is the why. Right. Temperaments are effectively a kind of a way to distinguish what is a kind of a dominant layer, OS layer that's more at play with the person than others. So some people tend to be far more abstract than others, for example. Some people tend to be far more concrete than others.
There's another way to go into this, which we've already
Okay.
brought up, which is the neural OS stack.
Sure.
And so layers 9, 8, and 7, corresponding to spectacular, abstract, and mimetic, these are the neural OS layers, which we can directly apprehend and experience within our experience. Spectacular being the most concrete.
Yeah, where you
where
experience
objects
objects.
take place, like this object, that object. I can be home and think about this space in an abstract way. It's not concrete to me, except the fact that these objects are arising in my brain, right?
Mhm.
In my neural OS. But the spectacular is a concrete thing in which objects and things are moving in and out of your perception.
Yeah, it's
right?
kind of like a quantum world where things appear into an existence, interact with something, and disappear, only to reappear again. And these reappearances give us are happening pretty fast, actually. And so the narrative arc that happens
Yeah.
to weave through them is what we would call a narrative, which appears beyond
Right.
the horizon.
That's
we can't really see it.
So-
we just assume it as we see these objects come and go
Right.
in
But we're
in
going
changes.
down. We're going down for now. So what's to be said about the spectacular, i.e. the concrete, is that nothing happens outside of it. You are always in a context which is concrete, in which your body is with you.
Mm-hmm.
Your body is always the most concrete thing that's always with you. It's an object that is never not with you. That includes all the things around you, like this table, that paper, the laptop, the camera. These are concrete
all
things,
of its apprehensions.
right? So even if we want to think about a table in the abstract, not just this table, an object must appear in our perception, which is concrete.
Yeah,
That
so
object is then filled with the abstractions, right? And so this is how we move down the layers. So no matter what, the concrete is always present. It's always the thing that's there.
and it's always expressed by abstraction. Like the two layers express each other
Right.
at all times.
There's that back and forth between abstract and concrete.
Yeah, in a sense that all concrete things have abstract labels. For example, like this
Right.
table versus that table versus this table, versus
chair,
that table.
couch, camera.
They're always like the table.
That
That's the abstraction.
codependent arising. This is difficult. So
But
we're
this is not that, and not this, and not that. So like again, you got different separation. So all abstractions,
Right.
you can't get an abstraction out without something concrete to represent it, and you can't get anything concrete. You can't perceive really anything concrete without applying some kind of abstraction, telling
to know
you
what type
what it
of
is.
thing that is. Otherwise, it's just a blob. You encounter a blob, which
Right.
happens all the
It
time.
has to be applied to a previous experience somehow.
So that's kind of the anchor into this, and we see that anchor in the bottom right of this chart, which is so we've got narrative, commitment, and execution. That's the devotional triad, what we call. And to the left here we have the pragmatic triad, process, constraint, protocol.
Okay. So before you continue, devotional triad. This is referring to a triad that operates primarily within the concrete layer. Although it itself
Right.
has a concrete
Yes.
aspect, an abstract aspect, and also a mimetic aspect being the narrative.
Yes.
So the concrete of the concrete is execution, actually
Yes.
doing something.
The abstract of the concrete is the commitment. The
The-
mimetic of the concrete is the narrative.
Right.
It's-
So
yeah.
this layer actually has the other layers embedded right in it.
Mm-hmm.
And direction being the actual shared phenomena that you could get out of it. So a thing moving through space and time in a particular direction with a specific momentum.
Right.
So that's the narrative arc, if you will.
Yeah, and we don't really even need to get into the middle part right now.
No, but I wanted to put that into context as to why it's even there.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the same division, but within the abstract. So the protocol being the most concrete aspect of the abstract layer. The constraint being the abstract part of the abstract layer,
Right.
and the process being the mimetic counterpart, all of which constitutes an abstract terrain.
Sorry. Just
Yep.
the monitor has gone
Yeah.
down. It's gone
So-
down.
So that's how that is, and so the next one is the mimetic. Very similar.
Right, up
Nothing.
top.
Yeah. Just
Mhm.
again, a program is what is a mimetic concept that comes out concretely. Concept is the abstraction of programs. So it's like what programs are
And
supposed
we're
to
going
be
to get into
doing.
that if it's up to me. We will be getting right into
Yeah,
this.
and phenomena being the mimetics that this is all talking about. Again, and all of this winds up being guide in terms of a narrative.
Yep.
A piece of guidance to like how which program the programming just displays how to approach step by step. So that's the basic breakdown of what you're seeing in this picture. With the middle being like a more generic representation of exactly what we just said.
Right.
With the concrete being the guild.
This is
abstract being the
stepping
model.
back, and this is the template that's being applied to each of these triads.
Yeah.
Basically.
So this is a recursive.
So guild we have here, which is pointing towards the concrete. Model we have here pointing towards the abstract, and then archetype pointing up towards the
Mimetic.
mimetic. Yeah.
Yeah. So these layers are very fundamental to the way this whole thing is laid out.
And this is a fairly old chart.
Yeah. This is where we got the symbol from.
Just wondering why my monitor is not working. I'm sure it'll be fine. We appear to be still streaming. There we go. We're good.
Okay.
We is a good.
So yeah.
Cool. So where were we getting?
So you wanted to use that.
Not a bad, yeah.
So now we can just use that to introduce the cards.
Yeah.
Because the cards
Exactly,
are
that's-
based off of this
That's
entirely.
the next thing. There's really nothing else here that we need to go into.
Yeah, we could talk about the flipping of abstract and concrete to some extent here, but I'm not sure how this might apply.
We
here.
really did with the
Before.
the tree.
Yeah, we did that
example,
before.
The pine tree, whatever.
We didn't. Did we cover? Yeah, we covered from the ones.
Yeah, the order chaos
Yeah.
thing, big time.
Yeah. So now that we've covered the picture, we can actually make sense out of what the heck
Yeah.
we're looking for out of this.
So we have tried to constrain this idea into how can it be represented on cards. So in our mind we can have these concepts and whatever and be able to navigate organization and their interrelations and constraints and all this. But what about how to use something like index cards to
Can you
convey
carry this for a second?
the system?
I'll be right back.
Yeah.
Yeah, just keep going.
Okay. Fine. So we have here basically a direct reflection of the previous chart. We have our narrative commitment execution here in the bottom right. That's the devotional triad, and we'll see in this chart here on the right side, the rightmost column, again narrative commitment execution. And so basically if we take the outermost triads here of this, forget the center for now, we've got devotional on the right, narrative commitment execution, process, constraint, and protocol for the pragmatic triad, and then phenomena, concept, and program for the academic triad. And we can see those three each reflected here. So we've got the top. Actually, let's just go by columns. So on the right column here, narrative commitment execution. The middle column, process, constraint, protocol. The leftmost column, phenomena, concept, program. So if we were to give a label to each of these columns on the far right side, we would potentially give it a concrete label if we wanted to. The middle we could give it an abstract label, and the left we could give a mimetic label. Now, according to the previous chart, if we wanted to, we could also give the rightmost a guild label, the middle a model label, and the leftmost column the archetype label. But we're just going to probably stick with concrete on the right, abstract in the middle, mimetic on the left. And we basically got this laid out into a table here. And we're expecting that some of these aspects, or however you would call it, are going to be represented by a card type. So potentially a different color, maybe a different color may be represented by each one, but a type of card. So we may have an execution card, a commitment card, we may have a narrative card. This is kind of the gray zone, I guess. The way that I've seen it, the way that I've tried to work with the most simple, most basic things to start with, is we've got an execution type, a commitment type, then we have a protocol type, a constraint type, and we have a program type, a concept type. And for me, these up here have remained somewhat ambiguous, the narrative, process, and phenomena. As far as a card representing something, it hasn't yet made a whole lot of sense to use a card to do that. But definitely the relationship between abstract and concrete is very predominant, and also I can see that there's probably a wrapping phenomenon. So we've got concrete on the right, abstract in the middle, mimetic in the left, and then up top here we have the perceptive, right? So we have that sandwich thing happening here. If we take the gray and put it off to the right, we kind of have the eye chart, remember?
Yeah.
Although this, I don't think we'll get into that right now. All we want to probably deal with is the relationships between, and this is how I would break it down, is that when we look at the bottom two rows, right, the bottommost we've got the concrete, right? So this chart breaks down into concrete, abstract, and mimetic in two ways along both axes, right? So along the column axes, we've got on the right side concrete, and then middle abstract, left mimetic. On the on the row axes, we've got at the bottom concrete. We've got concrete, and the middle abstract, and the top mimetic, right?
Yep.
So what we find is that the relationship between, looking at the right side here, the bottom right, the relationship between execution and commitment, the way that those cards look, if each one is to represent a card, they have a certain look to them, a certain feel, a certain what they do. The concrete is very much like a tree of things that need to be done, like in a program or a protocol or a task list. You have to do this and then that, and if this isn't done, then you have to do this and that.
Yeah, so
right?
like a schedule.
A schedule, and then you move up in the abstract row, the middle row here, you have the shape of things of what they need to look like in relation to other things. You don't describe the specific spaghetti of how, or the tree of how that's getting done. You're describing the abstract relations between the things. In other words, you have a type and its properties, and it's very clean like that. And
it's timeless.
And we see that along. So on the right side between commitment and execution, we see that. In the middle, the pragmatic between protocol and constraint, we see that pattern. On the left, between program and concept, we see that pattern.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
That same pattern. But it's taking on a different flavor depending on if in the far right it's a concrete, this is the tasks that I have to do, right? Because I am committed to this thing, right? These are very concrete things. I am committed to this
This
live
is like
stream.
a literal action, like
Yeah.
boots on the ground kind of stuff.
Right, but and you see that literal action everywhere else too, but this is the most object oriented.
So in the protocol sense, the action is still there, but it's actually an abstraction in the sense of like the act you're talking about is about other acts.
and,
Right?
And you don't necessarily care if it's your
Yeah.
act. It's in
the
a
act,
sense
it's the act
timeless.
in general, yeah.
So this is the weird thing that it takes on that timeless sort of sense when we move into the
Even
middle.
though a protocol in and of itself is a concrete element
Right.
of that abstraction.
But we've moved into the middle column, in which things are no longer tied directly to
Right now,
the concrete comings and goings of objects in your perception, right?
Yeah, yeah. So a good analogy I think here is like execution is a lot like a needle on a vinyl, just like that point of time where it actually is touching it, and so the music is playing at that point in time. Whereas a protocol would be like the specification for the type of for the type of pattern you have to etch into the record to create such and such note or whatever.
Right.
So that would be that. So the protocol is really, really concrete. I mean, that pattern is that specific pattern and no other pattern, right? Like, we're not saying that this is like abstract in that sense. However,
Right.
until it's played by that needle, it still exists in a kind of an ether of potential, right?
Right. Yeah, and so you can put the needle on the record player and suddenly it's just playing an A chord or an A note, right? But if you want to make a new record and all you want it to do is play the C chord, well, there's a protocol for that. That protocol says the carrier must be etched in a way that it's bumping up and down in this per inch. It bumps up and down this many times, and then the needle sits there vibrating, and you've got a C.
Yeah.
And then you instantiate that protocol, and
By actually playing it.
sure, yeah. Or as a task, you want to. I'm going to make a C record that just plays the note C. So you follow the protocol. Now you've got this record, right? It doesn't mean that you've played it yet, but now you have the thing. You can play it. You've got a C.
Yeah. So that would be the concrete aspect of the abstract protocol, creating that protocol. So it's a step back from what is actually being done, still concretely, but about things. Therefore, it's in an abstract category of things being done.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, like this has been very tough for me to apprehend. So I know if anybody listening or watching doesn't get it, it's completely understandable.
There's more. It's more subtle when you start to jump into the mimetic, because technically speaking, a program is like it's like a protocol of protocols of how to put protocols together in a specific instance of time. So that's the concrete application there. In this time frame, these are the protocols.
Yeah.
These are the protocols that are bound together for this execution. So this is kind of like a whole pipeline of conceptually.
That's a shape that we need to see here and we see it with the eye chart as well. There's kind of an inner pair and an outer pair. So the inner pair here is the devotional and the pragmatic pairs, right? And the interplay between them then is described by the outer pair here being the academic. At least this one pair.
Yeah, so it would take care of that, and the perceptive pair would give it a different language in terms of itself rather than in terms of its constituents. So rather than in terms of what's being the tasks being executed, is like the perceptive would be like the reason for the task to be even in place, the full story behind the breakdown of these tasks, right? The holistic the holistic picture.
Yes, because you are bouncing down the layers again out into reality, and this is your context.
Yeah.
For why you are doing this thing.
So this is to bring it
And
back
that-
together
that's-
into a more
Fourth order cybernetics.
yeah. So that basically.
So the leftmost column here, academic. This is what I've referred to as third order cybernetics.
This is actually the study of the Lego pieces themselves, whereas the perceptive bit is the study of what got built out of the pieces. So it's like on the one side you have bricks, on the other hand side you have houses and buildings and plumbing and just a bunch of different. The language basically is what I'm saying. The language changes about from parts to wholes, if you want to put it that way.
Sure. Yeah. To linkages out into the whole. Yeah, and so I guess this is maybe an aside, but so between the devotional and pragmatic, the right side and the middle here, the correct or the manifold between those, the manifold interaction between abstract and concrete, is described in this program and concept, the academic. And then the manifold between all of this, the manifold of this model, this internal thing happening, or maybe system, whatever, the manifold between what we have here and the outside world, that's another manifold. The correct manipulation of this is fourth order cybernetics.
Yeah. Clear as mud.
Clear as mud. Yeah, there is two distinctive steppings that are happening, because all that we're seeing and describing here is still within this virtual reality, right?
Yeah.
That manifold out into the actual reality, that's
to share it with another entity of the same type, for example.
Whole other card game.
To process, not only do it for yourself, but also communicate that with another entity of the same type.
Yeah, and you bring in uncertainty and all this kind of stuff.
To bring it up to a layer of words, and then to bring it back down to a layer of understanding, which is basically what the difference is between perceptive and academic really is. One is on a layer of expression, the other is on a layer of internalization.
Yep. So this is a great place to be.
Yeah.
So how we wanted to bring this into remember the conversation model. So how can we link this in? A conversation is a concrete thing.
Yep. Execution.
Right? That's how it is. And so we're getting into the dashboard.
So if we're looking at a needle, the conversation would be the needle hitting the vinyl kind of thing. That's like if you think about the typical chat thing, that's like where things are happening, right? This is the point of connection. Every time something gets typed into a conversation, it makes it into the system.
Conversation is contextual, I guess, and depending on things.
It's a patterning of a particular carrier, right? Like it's placing stuff on top of carrier.
Couldn't you say like, I want to hear something specifically, so I take this record, boom, things happen, now I'm hearing it, right? Like you initiated that conversation with the medium.
Conversation is like a dance. It's interpretive dance, right? It's like action. It's anything.
The point is that you've had some type of expression.
Yeah.
And you wanted a response.
You enacted a ritual, and you're expecting the universe to supply you with a response. Yes.
Right.
That's the conversation. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation is basically a prayer.
And so. Yeah.
I'll leave that aside.
Fine. No, we could go there.
Let's leave the triggers aside, though.
So everything within the dashboard schema or whatever, everything is a conversation.
Yep.
There's nothing that's not within the context of a conversation. So everything that in complexity we're going to build up is embedded into that conversation. We are always having a conversation.
Yeah.
Right. So in the context of using cards, for example, to represent what we're doing, we could have written a card, say like, let's start a live stream, right? And this will be at the start of our stack, maybe a chain of cards.
Mm-hmm.
And this chain of cards could describe like the table of contents that I've been creating for these after the fact, right? Of what we actually did describe.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So messages being sent into the conversational context.
it's
adding
opening
to
a context.
opening a concept, adding to it, adding to it, adding to it, adding to it.
Yeah.
The meaning of the whole thing then can get processed into something.
Or even
Out
meaning
there.
meaning of little sections, even.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the point there. The point is to get a beginning point, message, ending point.
Which is what always happens. You're not in a Borg neural link with your friends. You say goodbye, and then sometime later you say, oh, hello.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, we're like that's the basic problem with the actual current software is that it is a Borg neural link. It's always on.
Always on, yeah.
That's not even real.
Yeah.
It doesn't represent anything out in the real world outside of the fact that there is a constant environment out there. Sure, but you don't get to hear everybody who yells into it all the time, right? It has a limit. It has propagational limits and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, the environment isn't infinite, and I think we aren't dealing with that problem properly.
Yeah. So that's all we're trying to do is model and reflect what we experience, actually, not arbitrary things which it introduce entropy. Right. We just want to describe things as
retool what we have into a way that we actually want to and feel correct with. Because the tools feel alien at the moment.
Sure. Yep.
Feel is not a good word.
And
the tools are alien at the moment.
You do feel dissonance. It feels bad.
What you feel alienated from is other people, not the tools, unfortunately.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And being a tribes of one in the 7 to 8 billion strong society makes no fucking sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So that's dashboard tech. So we've got a conversation. Within a conversation, we have broadcasts, right?
A broadcast is what happens when you have a conversation in a medium. So broadcast is a function of the fact that you're using a medium itself, and a medium sort of propagates signals.
Yes. Yeah.
It's
yeah,
more of
no,
a broadcast is more of a consequence.
To mention that too, that within a conversation, every single string or stretch of expression
is a broadcast
itself is a broadcast.
Yeah.
Even these little units.
Yeah.
But we also can take that to a more sort of grand.
Yeah, we can abstract the conversation as a broadcast itself.
Or even abstract the single thing said, like somebody says something amazing and it's a quote. It becomes a quote.
Yeah.
It becomes a thing on its own.
Absolutely.
So you have broadcasts are making up this conversation.
Yeah. Sorry, I gotta.
Yeah, so let's take a little break. We'll be right back and see. Yeah. Back to where we were is... Did we get a new comment? Oh, that might have been a while ago. No. Mind is... No, that's old stuff. Wait, I guess... we don't want to get back into that, though, I think.
No.
Dopamine.
No, but we did discuss that question, so.
Yeah.
Alright. We are on the last leg.
Potentially. Of where we wanted to go
For today, yeah.
Yeah.
So whenever,